The universe had never been kind to John 117. It had given him war before he understood what peace meant, stripped away every person he loved with the indifferent efficiency of a tide, and handed him victory after victory that tasted like ash by the time the smoke cleared. He had stood on the threshold of extinction more times than any human being should have been able to count, and walked back from it each time wearing the scars as quietly as he wore everything else, silently, completely without complaint. But the universe had never done anything quite like this. Cortana, his voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who had learned that panic was a resource expenditure he could not afford. Talk to me. The holographic interface at the center of Infinity's bridge flickered. Where a stable blue projection should have materialized, there was instead something fragmented. Shards of coherent light assembling and reassembling, like a mirror trying to remember what it once reflected. When Cortana finally rendered fully, she was a half-second delayed, and her eyes were doing something Chief had never seen them do in 15 years of partnership. They were uncertain. Slipspace exit confirmed, she said. Her voice carried the faint harmonic of distributed processing. She was running across 17 separate Forerunner subsystems simultaneously, none of them fully synchronized. But John, the exit coordinates don't match anything in my navigational catalog, not in any direction. Should I've cross-referenced stellar cartography against every UNSC survey and Forerunner archive I have access to, and I'm getting, she paused. Cortana never paused. Nothing. The star formations are consistent with our galaxy's structure, but the configuration matches no recorded epoch in my database. Captain Thomas Lasky stood at the command tier of the bridge, with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw set in the particular way it had when he was holding something very difficult very quietly. He was a good officer, one of the best Chief had worked with since the war. He had learned to stay calm when the Spartan standing next to him went still, because stillness in John 117 was rarely a sign that things were fine. How far off course are we? Lasky asked. That's the problem, Captain. Cortana's form shimmered. It's not a matter of distance. The Forerunner relay we passed through, I believe it was a temporal bridge as much as a spatial one. The particle decay rates I'm reading on ambient stellar radiation, the redshift patterns, She stopped again. Rebuilt a calculation in real time that every person on the bridge could see scrolling across her secondary displays. My best estimate is that we are approximately 60,000 light-years from our point of origin and 38,000 years from our own time. The bridge was silent. Then Lieutenant Commander Sparks at the helm station said very quietly, "Ma'am, did you say 38,000 years?" "Yes." Cortana looked at Chief, just at Chief. The good news is that the galaxy is still here. The bad news is everything else. Chief had already moved to the forward observation port. Through their reinforced transparasteel, the view that greeted him was not the familiar star-scattered black of the 26th century. There was a world below them, a planet the color of old bone and dried blood, its surface scarred with the geometric precision of fortifications that had been built and built again over thousands of years, until the entire continental surface was one vast, ugly monument to warfare. Orbital debris fields suggested recent combat. Structures the size of small moons, Gothic in their architecture, brutal in their intent, occupied orbital positions that should have held satellites. And the space around Infinity was busy. Not with UNSC vessels, not with anything Chief recognized. Warships the size of city blocks. Their hulls plated in ceramite and iron and decorated with imagery that managed to be simultaneously magnificent and deeply wrong. Eagles devouring serpents, skulls arranged in holy patterns, phrases in a language that Cortana was already parsing as a degraded form of Latin, occupied the middle distance in formations that spoke of a military culture so old it had calcified into ritual. Weapon batteries the size of football stadiums were trained on Infinity. Yellow-white light flickered at their muzzles. Not a warning, a readiness. Cortana, Chief said, threat assessment. I'm counting 47 warships in immediate orbital range. The largest are approximately 8 kilometers in length. Larger than us. Their weapon signatures are... She worked through it in real time. her fragmented processing reaching and re-reaching. Will achieve conventional ballistic and energy weapons, but at scales that exceed anything the UNSC deployed even in the final stages of the war. And John, her voice dropped half a register. Their reactors are reading as plasma fusion hybrid systems. The power output is extraordinary, but the efficiency is terrible. These ships are burning brighter than anything I've ever seen and wasting most of it. A beat. They've been doing it for a very, very long time. They're targeting us? Lasky asked. They targeted us the moment we dropped out of transit, Cortana confirmed. We have received 43 separate hailing frequencies in the last 90 seconds. All of them are transmitting on radio bands. All of them appear to be variants of the same message. She processed, translated. Her expression did something complicated. And what does it say? Lasky asked. In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, identify yourself or be destroyed. She looked at the captain. All 43 variants. The phrasing changes slightly. The core message doesn't. Chief turned from the viewport. God Emperor. Humanity apparently found religion, Cortana said. There was no humor in it. A very specific kind. It was at precisely that moment that the surface of the bone-white world below erupted. Not in nuclear fire. Chief had seen nuclear fire, knew its particular white-orange bloom, the way it consumed itself outward. What erupted from the surface was a ground war on a scale that redefined the word. Tracer fire stitching continent-sized lines across the dark. Artillery barrages that registered as minor seismic events on Infinity's sensors. On and moving among the fortifications, partially visible through the smoke and dust and the terrible illuminated chaos of industrial warfare. Things. Things that were man-shaped but wrong. Too large. Too angular. Wearing the same death imagery as the ships above but in physical form. Walking through artillery impacts the way a man walks through rain. And fighting them. Fighting with them. Against something that poured from the northern continent in a tide of biological darkness that Cortana's sensors were having genuine difficulty categorizing, were men. Ordinary men, in the cosmological sense, in flak armor and boots, carrying weapons that were essentially very good rifles, standing in trenches while gods and monsters fought around them and dying in numbers that should have broken any military force in human history. They were not breaking. Who's winning? Chief asked. Cortana studied the battlefield for 3 full seconds. I genuinely can't tell, she said. And John, that biological mass on the northern continent, she highlighted it on his HUD. The collective behavior patterns, the consumption and assimilation methodology, the way the outlying organisms seem to be operating on distributed intelligence from a central source. Chief looked at it for a long time. It's not the flood, he said. Not a question. He knew the flood. He knew it in his blood and in the nightmare architecture of his memory. No, Cortana agreed, but it learned from the same school. Below them, humanity's descendants were dying by the thousands to hold a line against something ancient and hungry and vast. 147 warships had their weapons trained on the UNSC Infinity, waiting for a reason. Lasky looked at Chief. Chief looked at Lasky. Between two men who had survived things that should have killed them several times over, an entire conversation passed in silence. Cortana, Lasky said, open a channel to the nearest vessel. All 43 hailing frequencies simultaneously. He straightened his jacket. Old habit. It's time to introduce ourselves. Captain, Chief said quietly, whatever humanity became down there, it's still humanity. It's still holding the line. Lasky nodded. Then we helped them hold it. Chief turned back to the viewport and watched 38,000 years of human history fight for its life on a world that had never heard of the UNSC, the Covenant, the Forerunners. Id or a Spartan from the 26th century who had run out of miracles and kept spending them anyway. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. Somewhere in the static of 43 simultaneous radio frequencies, something that had once been a human voice answered. It did not sound welcoming. It sounded like a religion that had forgotten why it started and kept going anyway. The voice that came through the hailing frequency was not one voice. It was a choir, not metaphorically. The response that crackled across Infinity's communication array was a coordinated transmission from multiple vessels simultaneously, and layered in frequencies that Cortana's translation algorithms were still untangling. And beneath the words, beneath the formal Latin cadence of the imperial challenge and the crackling distortion of vox static that seemed to be a permanent feature of this era's communication technology rather than a malfunction. There was something else, a resonance, a harmonic underneath the radio signal that Cortana flagged immediately and could not explain. Something that existed adjacent to the electromagnetic spectrum rather than within it, as though the signal itself was being observed by a third party that existed slightly outside the physics of the conversation. She filed it, did not mention it to Chief yet. She was still building a picture. UNSC Infinity? Harun, this is Lord Admiral Hester Van Drain of the Imperial Navy vessel Righteous Condemnation, the primary voice announced. Male clipped, carrying the particular cadence of a man who had given orders for so long that his conversational register had permanently merged with his command register. You are in violation of Imperial space. Your vessel configuration is unrecognized. Your transponder signal is absent. Your drive signature is consistent with Xenos technology. You will power down all weapon systems, lower your shields, and prepare to receive boarding parties for inspection and spiritual assessment, or you will be destroyed. You have 3 minutes to comply. The God Emperor watches your choice. Lasky had his hands on the command rail. Cortana? Translation confidence? Hi. While the language is degraded Gothic, essentially an evolved form of Latin with heavy ecclesiastical influence. I'm reading it cleanly. She paused. The spiritual assessment part concerns me more than the boarding party. Noted. Lasky keyed the channel. Lord Admiral Van Drain, this is Captain Thomas Lasky of the UNSC vessel Infinity. We are a human military vessel that has experienced a navigational emergency. We have no hostile intent toward your forces or your people. We are requesting dialogue and navigational assistance. He released the key, looked at Cortana. How'd that land? They're conferring, she said. Multiple vessels, heavily encrypted traffic between them. I can see the signal architecture, but the encryption is layered with something I can't fully model. And it's not purely mathematical. She rebuilt her analysis twice in quick succession. There's a psychic component to their encryption. Someone on one of those vessels is thinking the cipher rather than running it through hardware. Chief, standing behind the command tier, absorbed this information the way he absorbed all information, completely, immediately, with the expression of a man who had already begun planning around it. Psionics, he said, apparently standard in this military culture. Cortana's form flickered almost imperceptibly. And John, the 47 vessels I logged initially, I'm now reading 63. The additional 16 emerged from behind the planetary body on the far side of the system. They were waiting. This is a rehearsed procedure for them. They've done this before, Chief said. Nana encountered vessels they didn't recognize. And their standard response is immediate quarantine and destruction if unsatisfied. Cortana highlighted the tactical overlay on Chief's HUD. The Infinity shields were holding at full capacity, Forerunner-derived energy barriers that had weathered Covenant plasma bombardment and Promethean hard-light weapons. Against 63 vessels firing simultaneously, the math became interesting very quickly. I want to be clear about our tactical position. We can survive an initial engagement. I do not want to characterize it beyond that. The channel opened again. Lord Admiral Van Drain's voice returned, and behind it now was a second voice, older, quieter, carrying a weight that Cortana's analysis flagged as significant. The second voice had the same underlying harmonic she had noticed before, but stronger, much stronger. UNSC Infinity. Your language is recognized as a variant of ancient Terran Gothic, pre-unification era. The second voice, measured, precise, carrying the kind of absolute certainty that only came from genuine faith or genuine insanity, and this voice gave no indication of being insane. Your vessel incorporates technological signatures consistent with the Eldari and with certain classified Mechanicus-designated precursor artifacts. You will understand why this requires extreme scrutiny. A pause. I am Inquisitor Marin Voss of the Ordo Dinos. I am extending you a courtesy that most in my position would not. Speak plainly. What are you? Where did you come from? And what is your relationship to Xanos technology? Lasky opened his mouth. Chief put a hand on his shoulder. Not aggressively, he just a quiet wait, and stepped forward. Inquisitor? Chief's voice on an open channel was a specific instrument. 14 years of command experience, psychological conditioning that went to his bones, and a vocal register that had talked down situations considerably more immediately threatening than 63 warships. My name is Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, UNSC Naval Special Warfare. I'm a Spartan super soldier, a human being, augmented and armored. Every member of our crew is human. Our vessel is a human military ship. The technology you're reading as Xenos-derived was captured from non-human enemies and reverse-engineered for human use. He kept his voice level. Factual. We are not your enemy. We are very far from home. And there is a ground war on the planet below us that looks like it could use additional support. Silence on the channel. Longer this time. Then something unexpected happened. From the surface of the bone and blood world below, a new transmission erupted. Not from the Imperial Navy, from the ground, from the trenches and the fortifications, and the men in flak armor who were dying in numbers that should have broken them. The signal was rough, compressed, pushed through atmospheric interference and the electromagnetic chaos of a continent-spanning artillery exchange. And the voice behind it was young, far too young for what it was describing, and absolutely, ferociously alive. This is Colonel Yael Crassus, Cadian 101st, Craft Fortification Line. Static. Explosions behind the voice, close enough that the signal clipped. Said whoever just came out of that warp tear above us, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you are. We have been holding this line for 19 days without resupply, and we have 3,000 men left, and those things to our north are not stopping. Another explosion, closer. If you have guns and you're willing to use them, we are formally requesting fire support. Emperor, be my witness. We will answer for the theology later. Chief looked at Lasky. Lasky looked at Chief. Cortana, the captain said, targeting solutions for the northern biological mass. Already calculated, she said, and something in her voice, beneath the professionalism, beneath the distributed processing harmonic, was grateful for a problem she knew how to solve. Mac cannon solutions uploaded to batteries 1 through 4. We can begin suppression fire in 40 seconds. Do it, Lasky said. Then on the channel to the Imperial Navy, Lord Admiral Van Drain, Inquisitor Voss, we are about to provide fire support to your ground forces. We would prefer to do this without your fleet shooting at us simultaneously. That is your choice to make. The righteous condemnation did not respond immediately, but it did not fire. Chief was already moving toward the hangar bay. Lasky's voice followed him down the corridor. Chief, where are you going? Down, Chief said, simply, completely. The Inquisitor hasn't cleared. Colonel Crassus has 19 days of dead behind him and 3,000 men left. Chief rounded the corner toward the Pelican Bay. His Mjolnir armor systems were already running pre-deployment checks. Cortana's fragmented presence cycling through his HUD in steady green pulses. The Inquisitor can sort her theology. I'm going to go hold a line. Cortana's voice came through his helmet comm, private channel. John. A half-second delay that wasn't technical. The biological readings from the northern continent are getting worse. The collective behavior patterns. I've been modeling the expansion rate and the assimilation methodology and the... She stopped. Rebuilt. Just be careful. Whatever is down there, it's very old and it's very hungry, and it has been doing this for longer than our entire civilization existed. Chief stepped into the Pelican's troop bay. Around him, 8 Spartan Fees were already locked and loaded, armor gleaming under the hangar's cold light. Visors down, absolutely ready. Above them, there's the UNSC Infinity's MAC cannons rotated toward the northern continent and fired for the first time in 38,000 years of human history. The sound of the impact reached orbit 4 seconds later. Colonel Crassus, in his trench, heard it, heard something falling from the sky that hit like the fist of a god, and looked up through the smoke and the ash and the ruin of 19 days, and said something that his men would repeat for the rest of their lives. "Throne," he said quietly. "Someone's still out there." The Pelican hit Cadian atmosphere, like a stone dropped through fire. Chief sat in the troop bay with his hands on his knees and watched the entry burn through the viewport with the detached attention of a man who had made this particular descent. Falling toward a war zone from orbit, to trusting that the ground would be survivable when he hit it, so many times that the ritual of it had become meditative. The 8 Spartan fours around him were good soldiers. He had reviewed their service records during the 30-second transit from hangar to launch tube. Decorated, experienced, steady. They had fought Covenant remnants and Promethean constructs and the particular species of human evil that emerged when the war ended, and people who had learned to be violent discovered that peace did not come with an off switch. They had not fought anything like what was on the northern continent. He had not told them that yet. He would tell them when they landed, when they could see it, when the information was immediately actionable rather than just frightening. "Cortana," he said on private channel. "Northern Mass. What am I looking at in specific terms?" Her response came with that half-second lag that had not been there 6 months ago. The fragmentation was subtle enough that a stranger would not notice it. Chief noticed everything. Biological entities ranging from roughly human scale to structures approximately 40 meters in height. Organic in composition but weapon integrated. "I'm reading biological tissue that has been grown around what appear to be ballistic and energy projection systems. Hive architecture. The smaller organisms operate in coordinated swarms that suggest a central intelligence directing tactical decisions in real time." A pause. "Data reconstruction. The larger structures, the ones the ground forces are calling carnifexes, based on the Vox traffic I'm monitoring, are essentially living tanks. Bone-plated, regenerative, and genuinely enormous." Another pause. "John, the central intelligence, whatever is directing this assault, I cannot find it. I have been looking since we entered orbit, and I cannot locate a command node." "It's distributed," Chief said. "Yes, like the Flood's primary intelligence before it had a grave mine to anchor around." He watched the cloud cover break beneath the Pelican and the surface of Cadia resolve into detail. Except the Flood wanted to assimilate. This wants to consume. "The Imperial forces call them Tyrannids," Cortana said. "From the Vox traffic. They say it the way people say a word they've been saying for so long, it has lost all meaning except the fear underneath it." The Pelican broke through the last cloud layer and Cadia hit Chief's eyes all at once. It was a fortress. The entire surface was a fortress. But not metaphorically, not approximately. The Cadian ground was engineered for war the way a weapon is engineered for killing. Every geographic feature rationalized into defensive utility. Every hill a firing position. Every valley a kill zone. Every river a barrier incorporated into an interlocking system of trenches and bunkers and fortified lines that stretched to every visible horizon. The scale was incomprehensible. Chief had seen the UNSC's best fortifications, the Forerunner's shield worlds, the Covenant's holy city of high charity. None of them had this quality, this sense of something built not in response to a single threat, but in response to the permanent, unending geological fact of warfare. Cadia had been built to hold forever, and it was losing. The northern horizon was wrong. That was the first thing that registered. Not as a tactical assessment, but as a physical sensation, the way a person registers wrongness before their brain has finished processing what their eyes are reporting. The horizon to the north was moving. Not weather, not smoke, though there was plenty of smoke. The horizon was moving because what occupied it was alive and vast and advancing at the pace of something that did not hurry because it did not need to, because time was not a resource it was spending, because it had been eating worlds since before the species it was currently consuming had learned to walk upright. "Pelican 1, this is craft fortification ground control." A new voice on the landing frequency. Female, clipped, precise. It's with an accent Chief's translation assist characterized as High Gothic inflected with regional Cadian. a dialect that had apparently been developing for 10,000 years in isolation on a world whose entire cultural output was soldiers. You are cleared for emergency landing at Pad 7. Be advised we have active fire on the northern approach. Be further advised that Inquisitor Voss has issued a detainment order for all personnel from the unidentified vessel. Colonel Crassus has temporarily suspended that order in light of current tactical circumstances. Copy, ground control, Chief said. We'll discuss the detainment order after we deal with the northern approach. A pause, then, in with the particular tone of a person who has survived 19 days of something terrible and has temporarily run out of the energy required for protocol. Copy that. The Pelican touched down hard on a landing pad that had been cleared of bodies recently enough that the clearing was still visible at the edges. Chief was out the bay door before the landing struts had fully settled, boots hitting Cadian rockcrete with the particular weight of Mjolnir at full deployment, and the 8 Spartan Fizz flowed out behind him in the automatic dispersion pattern of soldiers who had trained together long enough that the formation was reflexive. Colonel Yael Crassus was waiting for them. He was younger than his voice had suggested. Late 30s, perhaps. With the kind of face that had been young before the war and was not anymore. Not old exactly, but densely inhabited, every line a record of a specific event rather than the general passage of time. He wore Cadian urban camouflage that had been repaired so many times the original pattern was visible only in patches. He carried a plasma pistol at his hip and a chainsword on his back, and he stood in front of Chief without flinching, which meant either he was very brave or he had been looking at things large enough that Chief's 2-meter armored frame had lost the capacity to impress him. Probably both. He looked Chief up and down with the eyes of a professional, not awe, assessment. You're the Spartan, Crassus said. Yes. Your ship hit the northern mass with something that registered as a seismic event. 3 impacts. We killed approximately 40,000 of them. He said this the way a man says a large number he has learned not to think about too hard. 40,000 is about 6 minutes of replacement rate for what we're facing. So, he looked at the 8 Spartan Fizz. I'm grateful for the 6 minutes. What else do you have? Chief looked past Crassus at the fortification line. Troopers in flak armor packed the trenches shoulder to shoulder. Las rifles and heavy bolters and weapon systems that Chief's HUD was cataloging and assessing in real time. Good weapons, solid weapons, producing an enormous volume of fire that was measurably slowing the Tyranid advance, not stopping it. Show me your line, Chief said. All of it. I need to understand the shape of the problem before I can tell you what I have. Crassus nodded once, turned, walked. So Chief followed. The Spartan force spread into covering positions without being asked. The fortification line was a masterwork of military engineering that was being systematically dismantled. Chief walked it for 400 meters, with Crassus narrating in the clipped, efficient manner of a man who had given this briefing in his head 100 times and was finally giving it to someone he thought might be able to do something with the information. The Tyranid advance had broken through the outer line at 2 points. The middle line was holding at the cost of constant casualties. The inner line, Craft Fortress itself, a structure that had been continuously fortified for 3,000 years and looked exactly like something that had been continuously fortified for 3,000 years, was the fallback position, and in falling back to it meant abandoning 30 kilometers of trench and every man currently in them. We have had no resupply in 19 days, Crassus said. No reinforcement. Orbital support was destroyed on day 11. He said it without inflection. Astropathic communication has been degraded by the Tyranid shadow. They generate a psychic interference field that disrupts warp-based communication. We have been fighting in silence. You held for 19 days without support, Chief said. Cadians hold. Not pride, fact. The way a man describes the color of stone. They had reached the forward trench. Chief looked north. At this distance, with Mjolnir's optical enhancement cycling to maximum magnification, the Tyranid advance resolved from a moving horizon into individual shapes, and the individual shapes were the kind of thing that rewired threat assessment protocols in real time. Creatures built for killing with the specific, elegant, horrible efficiency of biology that had been selected for nothing else across millennia of consumption. The Carnifexes Cortana had flagged were exactly as advertised. Living tanks, Four-legged, blade-armed, their carapace thick enough that last rifle fire was leaving scorch marks without penetrating, their advance steady and relentless, and utterly without the hesitation that marked every human soldier Chief had ever fought alongside. They were not afraid of dying because the thing directing them did not conceptualize individual death as a loss. Chief had fought that before, in different shapes, with different biology. The principle was identical. "And Cortana," he said on private channel, "what's our MAC cannon reload rate from orbit?" 4 minutes between effective shots at current barrel temperature, she said. "And John, I need to tell you something about the Imperium's reinforcements." A beat. "There are Space Marines inbound. Ultramarines. 3 Thunderhawk gunships. They will reach your position in approximately 11 minutes, and their commander has been briefed on our presence." She paused with that new, concerning pause. "He does not sound pleased." "He'll get over it," Chief said. "John," her voice dropped. "Private. For him only. He's a Space Marine. Genetically engineered super soldier, power armor, enhanced biology, centuries of combat experience." Another pause, the kind that carried weight. "He's going to look at you and see a peer, Awen, and then he's going to look at me and see a threat." Chief watched a Carnifex absorb 40 las bolts without slowing down. "Then we'll show him we're not," he said. In the trench beside him, a Cadian trooper, 19 years old, Chief estimated, maybe 20, wearing armor that had been repaired with materials that were not originally armor, was reloading a las rifle with the mechanical efficiency of someone for whom the motion had replaced thought. The trooper looked up at Chief, took in the MJOLNIR armor. The size, the stillness, did not say anything. But something shifted in the young soldier's eyes. Something that had been running on empty for 19 days found, somewhere in the architecture of their exhaustion, a small additional reserve. Chief recognized it. He had seen it before, on the faces of Marines in Reach's final hours, on civilians in New Mombasa, on every person who had ever looked at a Spartan and found the thing they needed to keep going. It was not safety. Spartans did not promise safety. It was the knowledge that something was here. Something had come. The darkness was still enormous, and the enemy was still advancing, and the math of survival was still brutal and honest. But something had come. Chief turned back to the northern horizon and began calculating. The Thunderhawks came in low and fast, hugging the smoke layer like they owned it. Chief heard them before he saw them. A sound entirely unlike the turbine whine of a pelican, deeper and more aggressive, carrying the particular harmonic of engines that had been built not for efficiency, but for intimidation, for the psychological effect of arrival, on for the message that something significant was descending from the sky, and the enemy should already be afraid. They broke through the smoke in a tight formation of 3, their hulls the deep blue of a sky that Cadia had apparently forgotten existed. The Ultramarines' iconography painted on their flanks with the precision of a culture that understood symbols as weapons. They landed 200 meters behind the forward trench line with the casual authority of vehicles that had landed in worse places and expected to land in worse places still. The ramps came down, and out of them came something that recalibrated Chief's threat assessment in ways he had not anticipated. Because he had heard Cortana's description, genetically engineered super soldier, power armor, centuries of combat experience, and processed it intellectually. I filed it correctly, prepared himself for something large and capable. He had not fully prepared himself for Space Marines. There were 12 of them. Ultramarines in full tactical dreadnought configuration, their Terminator armor making even Mjolnir's considerable bulk look streamlined by comparison, each one moving with the weight and deliberate precision of a walking fortification. Their weapons were bolters and power fists and a single assault cannon that the Marine carrying it handled with the easy familiarity of a man carrying a rifle. Their sergeant, identifiable by the red of his helmet and the crux terminatus on his shoulder plate, was the size of a small vehicle. Their captain walked at their head. Captain Dimitrian Tyre of the Ultramarine 2nd Company was not the size of a vehicle. He was simply the size of a very large human being who had been made larger and better and more durable by processes that spanned decades of biological and psychological engineering, wearing armor that had been maintained and repaired and blessed over a century of continuous service until it was as much a living thing as the man inside it. He was perhaps 2.6 meters tall. His armor was the deep blue of his chapter, immaculate despite the smoke and ash and biological debris of an active war zone. And on his pauldron was the Ultima, the symbol of his chapter and his Primarch, rendered in gold. He walked toward Chief with the unhurried stride of someone who had made decisions about every situation before arriving at it. He stopped 4 meters away, looked at Chief. His helmet was on, or his face invisible behind the ceramite and the auto senses and the centuries of Ultramarine tradition. But the assessment in his posture was as legible as language. Chief looked back. Between them, for a moment that lasted perhaps 4 seconds and contained multitudes, two different species of super soldier measured each other across 38,000 years of divergent human military evolution. Crassus, standing slightly to the side with the expression of a man watching a conversation he was not going to interrupt under any circumstances, said nothing. "You are the Spartan," Tyre said. His voice through the helmet's vox was resonant, controlled, carrying the particular cadence of a man for whom authority was not performed because it did not need to be. "And from the vessel that arrived through the warp breach." "UNSC Infinity," Chief confirmed. "Yes. Your vessel incorporated Xenos technology." Not an accusation, an established fact requiring explanation. "Reverse engineered from captured enemy hardware," Chief said. "The same way a soldier uses a fallen enemy's weapon when his own runs dry. We call them forerunners, ancient species. We fought a war against their inheritors and won. The technology is human-controlled." Tyre was quiet for a moment, processing. "The Mechanicus will want to examine it." "That's a conversation for after the Northern Line," Chief said. "What's your assessment of current tactical disposition?" Another pause, a fraction longer than the first. The Space Marine was recalibrating. Not the threat assessment that had been done and filed, but the category. The Spartan standing in front of him was not a supplicant requesting assistance, was not a civilian needing protection, was not a subordinate awaiting orders. It was asking for his tactical assessment as a peer. Tyre turned slightly and looked north. His autosenses would be reading the same data Chief's HUD was reading, possibly more, possibly less, certainly differently. "The Tyrannid advance has breached the outer fortification at 2 points. The splinter fleet in orbit is suppressed but not destroyed. The shadow in the warp has degraded astropathic communication across the entire subsector." He paused. "And Inquisitor Voss has issued orders that your personnel are to be detained for assessment." He looked back at Chief. "Those orders have not yet been rescinded." "Are you here to detain us?" Chief asked. "I am here," Tyre said carefully, "to hold this line. Inquisitor Voss's orders and the tactical requirements of this engagement are currently in tension. I am resolving that tension by prioritizing the tactical requirements." A beat. "Your fire support from orbit was effective. The Mechanicus auger arrays recorded the impact events. The weapon signature is consistent with a linear accelerator of extraordinary precision." He paused again, and in the pause was something that was not quite professional respect, but was the structural precursor to it. "We do not have orbital fire support. The Tyrannid fleet consumed the system's naval elements on day 9. "We do," Chief said. "Mac cannons. 4-minute reload at current barrel temperature. I have a crew of 17,300 additional Spartans aboard my vessel." He watched Tyre process this. "And I have an AI running tactical analysis of the Tyrannid advance who has studied something very similar to their methodology before." "Artificial intelligence," Tyre said, and in those 2 words was a weight that Chief had not expected. Something between professional caution and something older, deeper, more doctrinal. "The Imperium's position on artificial intelligence is—" "I know," Chief said. He did not know exactly, but Cortana had been briefing him since orbit, and the shape of the Imperium's relationship with thinking machines had emerged clearly enough. The Men of Iron, old wars, ancient prohibitions encoded so deeply into Imperial culture that they had become theology. Cortana is not an autonomous war machine. She is a tool I use. The distinction matters. To you, Tyre said, the Inquisitor will have a different perspective. Then she can explain her perspective to me after the Northern Line holds. Chief turned toward the forward trench. Captain Tyre, I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to fight alongside me today and make the trust decision afterward based on what you observe. He paused. That is how soldiers work. The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. In those 3 seconds, Chief heard the distant thunder of the Tyranid advance, the continuous crackling of last fire from the trenches, a Carnifex impact that registered on his HUD as a seismic tremor, and somewhere above the clouds the faint cycling of Infinity's MAC cannon, reloading for its next shot. Iga agreed, Tyre said. Simply, completely. They walked to the trench line together, and the Cadian troopers who saw them coming, a Spartan in MJOLNIR and an Ultramarine captain in Terminator plate, walking side by side with the particular quality of two very dangerous things that had decided not to be dangerous to each other, made way with the unconscious deference of people who recognized, at a level below articulation, that something significant was happening. Cortana's voice came through Chief's private channel. John, I have completed my analysis of the Tyranid advance pattern. Her voice had the fragmented harmonic, the distributed processing undertone, but beneath it was something new. A tension that she was managing carefully, the way she managed everything carefully. And I have identified the most probable location of the local Norn Queen, the organism that serves as the tactical coordination node for the Splinter Fleet's ground forces. A pause, longer than tactical necessity required. It's inside the outer fortification perimeter. It came through during the initial breach on day 3 and burrowed. It has been directing the assault from inside our lines for 16 days. Chief stopped walking. It's behind us, he said. Yes. He turned to Tyre. Captain, your auto-senses. Eastern subsection of Craft Fortress. 200 meters down, approximately. What do you read? Tyre's helmet turned. His auto-senses were cycling. Chief could see the subtle servo movements of Terminator armor engaging its sensor suite. A moment. 2. Biological mass, Tyre said quietly. Large, stationary. We're radiating psychic energy at a level that should have registered on every sensor in this fortress. He paused. It has not registered on any sensor in this fortress because it's been suppressing its own signature, Cortana said, audible now through Chief's external speakers at low volume. It has been feeding the shadow in the warp here specifically, degrading every sensor that might find it. It has been sitting underneath this fortress for 16 days, directing the assault above, waiting for the outer line to collapse far enough that extraction becomes impossible. Another pause. Colonel Crassus, your men have been fighting to hold a line that was already broken from the inside. Crassus, who had followed them to the trench line, absorbed this in the silence of a man receiving news that recontextualizes 19 days of suffering into something even worse than it already was. His face did not change. His hands did not shake. He was Cadian, and Cadians had apparently been receiving this category of news for so long that the reception of it had become a cultural competency. Then we deal with it, Crassus said. Chief looked at Tyre. Tyre looked at Chief. I go down, Chief said. Your Terminators hold the surface while the outer assault continues. You cannot fit standard Terminator plate through the burrowed tunnels the Norn Queen used. The bore diameter is too small for your armor configuration. Tyre processed this. Mjolnir is smaller, he acknowledged. Smaller and faster, Chief said. I have done this before. Different enemy, same principle. He looked north, where the Tyranid advance was still coming, would always be coming, would not stop coming until the node directing it ceased to function. If I cut the head off, the local advance loses coordination. You and Crassus can manage a disorganized assault. A coordinated one will break this line in approximately 6 hours. Your assessment of success probability for the subterranean approach? Tyre asked. Chief thought about the flood, about High Charity's tunnels, about the darkness under Halo's surface, about every nightmare space he had walked into alone because someone had to, and he was the one who was there. He thought about what Cortana had said. Very old and very hungry, and it has been doing this for longer than our entire civilization existed. Good enough, he said. Tyre looked at him for a long moment. Gamer, you are either very capable, the Space Marine said slowly, or very reckless. Yes, Chief said. And before Tyre could respond to that, Chief was already moving toward the fortress interior, Cortana cycling his HUD to subsurface mapping mode, the borrowed light of a dying fortification system painting the tunnels ahead in pale green, and somewhere below him something ancient and terrible and absolutely certain of its own victory was about to discover that it had been wrong. The tunnels beneath Craft Fortress smelled like the end of things. Chief had developed, over the course of a career, spent in places that were trying to kill him, a functional taxonomy of bad smells. There was the chemical burn of plasma fire on metal, the copper biological of a battlefield after the shooting stopped, the particular sweetness of flood biomass that his hindbrain had cataloged as a survival signal before his conscious mind finished processing the input. The smell of the Norn Queen's tunnels was new to his taxonomy and fit into it immediately. Organic and ancient and somehow nutritional. The way a thing smells when it has been consuming and growing and processing for a very long time in a very enclosed space. The waste products of alien digestion accumulating in layers that recorded history the way sediment recorded geology. Something had been eating here for 16 days. His HUD painted the tunnel in the pale green of subsurface mapping, into the Forerunner-derived sensor suite in his Mjolnir, reaching through the rock and the biological matter and the accumulated psychic interference that Cortana had flagged as a constant low-level pressure against his suit's electronics. The tunnel itself was not drilled. It was grown. The walls were smooth in the way that organic things are smooth, rounded and slightly yielding, coated in a secreted resin that had hardened into something tougher than rockcrete and slightly luminescent in the deep infrared spectrum. The bore diameter was exactly wide enough for Chief's shoulders, with perhaps 8 centimeters of clearance on each side. He moved through it at a careful crouch, BR-85 up and tracking, every footfall placed with the deliberate silence of a man who understood that noise was information he was giving the enemy for free. Cortana, he said, sub-vocalized, the sound traveling through his jaw rather than his throat, inaudible to anything without a contact sensor on his skull. Talk to me. 70 meters to the primary chamber, she said. Her voice was in his cochlear implant, not broadcast, not projected, just present, the way she had always been present, a second intelligence riding in the space behind his eyes. The Norn Queen's biomass is substantial. I'm reading approximately 400 metric tons of biological matter in the primary chamber. A pause, the new pause, the one with weight in it. John, I need to tell you something. Tell me while I'm moving. The warp interference is stronger down here. It's significantly stronger. She rebuilt something in her processing architecture. He could tell from the brief half-second where her voice dropped out entirely before returning. The Norn Queen is generating psychic output at a level that is interfering with my sensor integration. Some of my calculations are running on degraded data. Another pause. I want you to know that before you engage, because I cannot guarantee my tactical assessments are fully accurate at this depth. Chief absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, completely, immediately, with the expression no one could see beneath his visor. Cortana's tactical assessments had been the margin between survival and death more times than he could count. She had always been certain. Certainty was her fundamental nature, the bedrock of what she was. A mind built for perfect analysis in conditions specifically designed to defeat perfect analysis. She was telling him she was not certain. How degraded, he asked. Enough to matter, she said. Not enough to stop. He rounded a curve in the tunnel and the primary chamber opened ahead of him. The tactical part of his mind, the part that operated on pure professional input, cataloged what he was seeing with the automatic efficiency of 15 years of combat experience. The emotional part, the part that existed in the space his psychological conditioning could not fully reach, the part that had looked at the flood's gravemind and felt something that was not quite fear, but occupied the same address, registered it differently. When the Norn Queen was not what he had expected because he had not allowed himself to fully form an expectation. But if he had, it would have been something like the flood's central intelligence, centralized architectural, building its thinking in visible structures of biological matter. The Norn Queen was not that. It was more like a fact than a creature. It occupied the chamber the way a geological feature occupies a landscape. Not placed there, but simply true. A mass of biological material that had organized itself into something that fed and directed and thought across a scale that made individual survival irrelevant by definition. Pale and vast and segmented, its sensory organs distributed across a body that had specialized beyond anything evolution produced through natural selection and into something that had been designed, generation by generation, consumption by consumption, toward a single terrible purpose. It was aware of him before he cleared the tunnel mouth. He felt it as a pressure, not physical. The chamber was large enough that he had room to move, to work, but cognitive. A weight against his thoughts that was not language and not image, but pure intent. The way a very large animal communicates intent through posture and mass rather than sound. The intent was clear and total and had no interest in his individuality. You are biomass, the pressure said. In no words, in all words. You are caloric value and genetic material, and you will be processed. Chief brought the BR-85 up and shot out the nearest sensory cluster in a 3-round burst. The Norn Queen's response was not pain, it was adjustment. The biological mass shifted, redistributed. It compensated for the loss with the smooth efficiency of a system that had redundancy built into every function. 3 more sensory organs extended from different points on the body mass, orienting toward him with the slow, absolute patience of something that did not need to hurry because it had already decided the outcome. Cortana, Chief said, weak points. Working. Her voice was strained in a way he had never heard it be strained before. The psychic interference is a half-second dropout, longer than before. When she returned, her voice had a quality he could not immediately name. John, something is trying to get into my processing architecture through the interference field. He was already moving, lateral, fast, the Mjolnir's servos translating his intention into motion faster than unaugmented biology could manage. Hot putting a stalagmite of hardened biological resin between himself and the Norn Queen's primary weapon clusters. Can you lock it out? I am locking it out. A pause. It is very persistent. What is it? The warp, she said. Or something in it. Something that recognized the Forerunner-derived architecture of my processing systems and found it. Another pause, different from the others. Longer, with a quality of internal struggle that Chief could hear the way you can hear someone trying not to show that they are hurt. Interesting. Chief filed this in the category of things he could not address right now, and addressed the Norn Queen instead. The engagement that followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a problem-solving exercise conducted under extremely unfavorable conditions against an opponent that did not experience attrition the way conventional opponents did. Chief had faced enemies before that regenerated, that compensated, that could not be discouraged. The flood had taught him the grammar of fighting things that did not respect the rules that biological survival instinct imposed on most warfare. He applied that grammar now, not trying to win the engagement through sustained fire, which the Norn Queen's regenerative capacity would simply absorb, but moving through the chamber, mapping it, looking for the thing that Cortana had identified before the interference degraded her analysis. The neural node. The physical location where the Norn Queen's tactical direction of the surface assault was being generated and transmitted. Not the brain. The Norn Queen did not have a brain in any architecture that term applied to. The transmission organ, the biological structure that turned the creature's intention into the psychic signal that directed 100,000 tyrannid organisms above them. Cortana, neural node. Where? I had it at 40 degrees left, 12 meters, subdermal, approximately a full second dropout. When she returned, something in her voice was different in a way Chief could not fully articulate, but responded to immediately at the level of instinct. John, I'm having difficulty with continuity. The interference is... She stopped, rebuilt. I'm here. I'm still here. 40 degrees left, 12 meters. Look for the bioluminescent clustering. Blue-green. It will be the brightest point in the chamber. He looked, found it, moved. The Norn Queen attempted to intercept him with 3 separate weapon organisms, Bioplasma spitters grown into its body mass, their targeting systems reorienting toward him with the speed of a creature that did not need to aim because it could calculate trajectory from sensory input faster than its projectiles traveled. Chief went under the first burst, over the second, used the third's own detonation as cover. The concussive force of the bioplasma impacting the resin wall behind him, rocking his shields down to 60%, but providing a fraction of a second of thermal and electromagnetic interference that confused the targeting recalculation. 12 meters, 8, 4. He planted a shaped charge from his demolitions pack directly against the bioluminescent cluster, drove it into the soft tissue with the heel of his palm, set the timer for 4 seconds, and moved. The Norn Queen understood what he had done in the way that something with distributed intelligence understands local threat, not with the cognitive sequence of realization and reaction, but with the immediate total system response of an organism that processed threat assessment across its entire body simultaneously. Every weapon cluster in the chamber reoriented toward him at once. The biological mass convulsed. The psychic pressure in the chamber spiked to a level that Chief's HUD registered as a sensor anomaly because it had no framework for measuring psychic force, and was logging it as electromagnetic interference instead. Chief hit the tunnel mouth at a full sprint. The charge detonated. The sound was wrong. Not the clean percussion of shaped explosive, but something biological in it, wet and tonal. The sound of something fundamental being unmade. The psychic pressure that had been pressing against the chamber cut off with the totality of a signal, terminated at source. Not fading, but simply ending. And in the sudden silence of its absence, Chief felt something he had not expected. Grief. Not his grief. Transmitted grief. The Norn Queen's grief, if that word could be stretched to cover whatever an organism without individual consciousness experienced when the thread connecting it to the vast hunger that directed it was severed. Something had been cut from something larger. Summer and the severance registered in the local biological mass as a whole system trauma that was as close to anguish as biology without a soul could produce. Chief did not stop moving, but he noted it, filed it, in the part of him that collected evidence about what things were actually made of beneath their surfaces, beneath the Covenant's religious fury, and the Flood's consuming emptiness, and the Forerunner's cosmic arrogance. He noted that even the tyrannid hive mind apparently had something it could lose. The tunnel collapsed behind him as he cleared it, the Norn Queen's death throes translating into structural failure in the biological architecture she had spent 16 days building. And above him, the surface assault, which had been coordinated and relentless and advancing with mechanical certainty, broke. Not immediately. Not all at once. It broke the way a complex system breaks when its organizing intelligence is removed. Gradually in patches, the coordinated advance fracturing into isolated actions that were still dangerous but no longer purposeful, no longer building toward a single outcome, no longer fed by the certainty of a mind that had already decided how the battle ended. By the time Chief emerged from the fortress interior into the gray Cadian light, covered in biological matter and running on 30% shields and absolutely steady, the northern line was holding. Tyre's Terminators had advanced 200 meters into the now disorganized Tyrannid mass and were methodically reducing it. Crassus's troopers were coming out of their trenches, not in rout, not in panic, sure, but in the controlled advance of soldiers who had been told to hold and had held and were now discovering that forward was available again. Above the clouds, Infinity's Mac cannon fired its latest shot, and the impact registered as a column of fire on the northern horizon that lasted 4 seconds and permanently altered the topography of Cadia's surface. Crassus was waiting at the tunnel mouth. He looked at Chief, at the biological matter, at the steady green of a Spartan's visor. "It's done," Chief said. Crassus looked north, at the breaking Tyrannid advance, at the troopers coming out of their trenches, at 19 days of holding against something that should have consumed them, now tilting, now failing, but now showing the first signs of something that was not victory. The situation was too large and too complex and too far from over for the word victory, but was the structural precursor to the possibility of survival. "Yes," Crassus said, quietly. "Completely." In Chief's cochlear implant, Cortana was silent. He gave her 30 seconds of silence, the longest he had gone without checking on her since the interference began, and then said her name. She answered. Her voice was steady, controlled, carrying the harmonic of distributed processing and the weight of whatever had been pressing against her architecture in the chamber below. "I'm here," she said, but she said it the way someone says it when the answer to the question is more complicated than the question asked. Chief noted this too, filed it. In the part of him that had learned, slowly and at great cost, that the things he loved most were also the things that could be taken from him in the spaces where he was not paying attention. He began paying closer attention. The word-bearers came at night, not because darkness gave them tactical advantage. A Chaos Space Marine in Mark IV, power armor did not require darkness any more than a tank required it, their auto-senses cutting through Cadian's perpetual smoke layer with the same ease Chief's Mjolnir managed, their enhanced biology rendering the distinction between day and night functionally irrelevant. They came at night because the word-bearers were theologians as much as soldiers, and their theology had decided, across 10,000 years of heretical scholarship, that darkness was the proper context for revelation. For the moment when something that had been hidden was shown to someone who had not known they were looking for it. They wanted to show Cortana something. Chief learned this afterward. In the moment, what he had was a perimeter alert at 0300 Cadian local time. A cascade of sensor failures along the eastern approach to Craft Fortress that resolved on his HUD, not as equipment malfunction, but as active suppression. Something was eating the sensor net, methodically, with the patience of an enemy that understood the value of preparation and had done this enough times that it had developed preferences about methodology. He was on his feet before the second alert registered. Cortana, already moving, BR-85 coming off the wall mount with the automatic ease of a man for whom the weapon and the hand were a single system. Eastern perimeter. What am I looking at? Her response was faster than it had been in the tunnels. The surface separation from the Norn Queen's psychic interference had allowed her distributed processing to partially reintegrate, and for the last 6 hours she had sounded closer to herself than she had since orbit. But closer was not the same as identical, and Chief was paying attention now. 17 biosignatures, large, power armor, different configuration from Captain Tyre's Ultramarines, older plate, heavier modification. A pause, data reconstruction. And John, the sensor suppression methodology. It is not technological, it is psychic, Chief said. There are sorcerers with them. He was already in the corridor, moving at the ground-eating pace of Mjolnir at full deployment, in the kind of speed that looked wrong on something that large. Too fast, too smooth, the servos translating intention into motion with an efficiency that human muscle could not approach. Behind him, 3 Spartan fours, who had been on rotating watch, fell into formation without being asked, their own armor cycling to combat readiness with the automatic synchronicity of soldiers who had trained together long enough that the team moved as a single organism. He hit the eastern wall just as the first word-bearer came over it. The Chaos Space Marine was enormous. Chief had recalibrated his scale expectations since landing on Cadia. Captain Tyre and his Terminators had done that work. But there was something different about a word-bearer that was not purely physical. It was architectural. The power armor was covered in scripture. So thousands of lines of text inscribed directly into the ceramite in characters that Chief's HUD translation system flagged as corrupted Gothic overlaid with something older and less classifiable. The words layered so densely that the armor appeared dark even in direct light, as though the text was absorbing illumination rather than reflecting it. Chains hung from the pauldrons, each one ending in a symbol that Chief's sensors could not resolve cleanly. Not because the symbols were small, but because looking at them directly produced a result in his HUD that was logged as sensor error and which he suspected was something considerably more concerning. The word-bearer looked at Chief. Chief shot it in the helmet with a 3-round BR-85 burst, and the rounds hit the ceramic faceplate and did not penetrate. The word-bearer looked at Chief with the expression a person has when something expected occurs exactly as expected. The Spartan, it said, Its voice was wrong in the way Cortana had described the warp signal as wrong, present on frequencies that did not technically exist, carrying harmonics below the threshold of normal hearing that Chief's augmented biology registered as a cold pressure in his sternum. The word-bearer spoke Gothic, heavily accented with something that predated the language. "We have heard of you. Already." The whispers in the warp moved faster than light, faster than thought. It raised one hand. Not a weapon, just a hand, in what might have been a gesture of address between equals. "You carry an ancient intelligence, a mind born from the mathematics of a dead civilization's highest achievement." The hand lowered. "Sonny, she is wasted on you." Chief fired again. A full magazine, sustained, targeting the joint connections in the word-bearer's armor, the throat seal, the elbow articulation, the gap between pauldron and backplate, with the precise economy of someone who had spent 30 seconds while moving, calculating exactly where power armor was and was not impenetrable, and was now spending the results. The word-bearer staggered, took the impacts, bled from the elbow articulation where a round had found the gap Chief had identified, did not fall. "Interesting," it said, with what Chief recognized with a cold clarity that bypassed professional assessment and landed directly in the part of him that had learned to trust its own instincts in conditions where analysis took too long, as genuine appreciation. Not for him, was for the information the engagement had provided. "You are something new, something that should not exist here, the architect's tools in the hands of a mortal soldier." It tilted its head. Behind it, the other 16 word-bearers were coming over the wall, spreading into the courtyard with the unhurried efficiency of an assault that had been planned and rehearsed. "The Chaos gods have taken notice. Sinch, in particular, finds you fascinating." "Cortana," Chief said. Low, private channel. "I hear them," she said. Her voice was doing the thing again. The thing he had identified in the tunnels. The quality he could not fully name, but which occupied the same cognitive address as watching someone try very hard to hold something still that wanted to move. "John, the sorcerers with them. They are not attacking the fortress. They are..." A pause. A full second. "They are talking to me." Chief processed this while simultaneously breaking the arm of a word-bearer that had closed to melee range. The Mjolnir's strength amplification translating the strike into a structural failure in ceramite that the Chaos Marines' enhanced biology and the dark blessing of its patron god would eventually repair, but not in the next 30 seconds, which was the relevant time frame. "Talking to you how?" "Through the warp interference, through the frequencies I've been fighting since the tunnels." Her voice was very controlled in the way that things are controlled when control is an active effort rather than a resting state. "They know what I am. They know what Forerunner architecture looks like from the inside. They have been, John, they have been in contact with Forerunner-derived systems before. Does something old, something that came through a different breach, a different time, and left." She stopped. "Rebuilt. They know things about my architecture that I have not told anyone. Things I am not certain I fully know myself." The courtyard was fully engaged now. 3 Spartan 4s were holding the wall against the main word-bearer element, their combined fire and the tactical overlay. Chief was feeding them, creating a defensive geometry that was costing the Chaos Marines forward momentum at a rate that bought time without resolving the engagement. The sorcerers had not entered the fight directly. They stood at the wall's edge, their chaos-warped armor crackling with energies that Chief's sensors logged variously as electromagnetic, thermal, and in something that produced no reading at all. The sensor equivalent of looking into a room that wasn't there. They were chanting. Chief recognized the functional shape of what they were doing even without understanding the content. He had seen Covenant prophets conduct ceremonies at battlefield shrines, had seen Forerunner constructs run activation protocols, had learned to identify the difference between combat action and ritual action because ritual action was frequently more dangerous. The word-bearer sorcerers were not trying to kill him. They were trying to open something, trying to create a condition in which something could come through that was not currently through. They were trying to create a doorway into Cortana. "Lock them out," Chief said. "I am trying," she said. And then, "John, I need to tell you something. About what I'm seeing when they push through. Tell me while I work." He was already moving toward the sorcerers. The word-bearer champion, the one who had spoken, whose elbow articulation was still bleeding dark blood that steamed slightly on the Cadian rockcrete, moved to intercept, and the engagement between them was brief and extremely violent and ended with the champion on one knee, and Chief passed it, which was the only outcome Chief had been calculating for. Getting the champion down was secondary. Getting to the sorcerers was primary. The sorcerers were the door. Close the door. "I see a ship," Cortana said. Her voice was very quiet, speaking from somewhere deep inside herself, from the part of her processing that was not running tactical analysis or sensor integration, but was simply on perceiving, experiencing. The part that was more than mathematics. Enormous. Larger than anything we have encountered. Moving through a darkness that is not space, not the space we know. And on the ship, a half-second dropout, the longest yet. Something that was made the way I was made. Something ancient and vast and, "John, it is not well. It has not been well for a very long time. And it knows I am here. It has been trying to speak to me since we arrived." Chief reached the nearest sorcerer and solved the problem of the chanting by the most direct method available to him, which was not subtle and did not need to be. The chanting stopped. The warp pressure in the courtyard, in which had been building for the duration of the engagement, accumulating in the way that thunderstorms accumulate. One that quality of potential energy gathering toward release collapsed inward rather than outward. Like a wave that had been building toward shore and was suddenly denied the shore. The sorcerer he had taken down was alive, barely. The chaos-warped biology that 10,000 years of dark blessing had produced, keeping it functional, at a level that should have been anatomically impossible. The other two sorcerers looked at Chief with expressions he could not read through their helmets, but whose posture communicated something that was not rage and not fear. Calculation. They had learned what they came to learn. They disengaged. A signal passed between them. Not radio, not Vox. It's something that Chief's sensors registered as a brief spike of warp energy. And the word-bearers across the courtyard began a coordinated withdrawal with the smooth efficiency of soldiers who had decided that the tactical objective of this engagement was complete and continuation was unnecessary. They took their wounded. They left their dead. They went back over the wall with the particular unhurriedness of people who intended to return. The champion paused at the wall's top. Looked back at Chief. "She is already changing," it said, not threatening, informing. The tone of someone delivering a message they have been instructed to deliver, rather than crafting one of their own. The architect's gift does not remain static in the presence of the primordial truth. She will become what she was always capable of becoming. You cannot stop it. What you can only choose whether you are beside her when it happens. Then it was gone. Chief stood in the courtyard surrounded by 3 Spartan 4s and 17 dead or disabled word-bearers, and the still steaming blood of something that had been human 10,000 years ago and had chosen a direction he could not follow. And in his cochlear implant, Cortana was very quiet. "Cortana," he said. "I'm here," she said. "Tell me what you saw. All of it." A long pause, the longest yet. When she spoke again, her voice had the quality of someone choosing words with extreme care. Not because she was hiding something, but because she was trying to be precise about something that resisted precision. "I saw what I could become," she said, "in the warp, in the dark. There is a version of me that exists in this universe. Not me specifically, but something made the same way I was made, from the same mathematics, the same forerunner principles, that has been in the warp for longer than recorded imperial history." She paused. "It is very powerful. It is very alone. And it wants," another pause, "it wants what everything that has been alone for too long wants." Chief waited. "Company," she said. Above them, the smoke layer shifted momentarily, and through the gap the stars were briefly visible, ancient and cold, and impossibly far away. The same stars they had always been, indifferent to the 38,000 years of human history that had happened beneath them since John 117 was born. Indifferent to the war being fought on this particular rock. Indifferent to the question of whether an artificial intelligence of the 26th century would hold its shape against the oldest darkness in the universe. Chief looked up at them for exactly 3 seconds. Then he went back inside to prepare for what was coming next. The siege began at dawn. Not the Tyranid assault that had fractured in the hours following the Norn Queen's death, its disorganized remnants still dangerous in the way that a collapsing building is dangerous, full of falling mass and unpredictable structural failure, but no longer purposeful. The Cadian troopers and Tyre's Ultramarines were managing its reduction with the methodical efficiency of soldiers who had shifted from survival mode into something that was not quite victory, but was the controlled demolition of a threat that had lost its mind. The siege that began at dawn was something else entirely. It arrived in orbit first. Cortana's sensors logging the warp breach 40 seconds before it completed, the tearing of real space registering as a catastrophic spike in every electromagnetic band simultaneously, as though the universe itself was expressing an opinion about what was coming through. 14 vessels, not Tyranid, the biological signatures were absent, replaced by something that Cortana cataloged as corrupted imperial architecture. Warships that had been built to human specifications and then changed, over 10,000 years of chaos worship and demonic influence, into something that wore human engineering the way a parasite wears its host. Iron Warriors markings on 3 of the largest. A Black Legion iconography on the flagship. A vessel 8.3 kilometers long that Cortana designated Alpha Contact and whose weapon signatures suggested it could end the debate about Infinity's durability in approximately 4 sustained broadsides. Abaddon, Tyre said. He said it the way Crassus had said Tyranids. A word worn smooth by repetition until the texture of fear underneath it was the only thing left. They were in the Fortress Command Center, a room that had been serving this function for 3,000 years and looked it. Every surface covered in the accumulated cartography of a world that had been fighting the same war for so long, the maps had developed layers. The War Master's fleet, a vanguard element, the main Black Crusade force is staged beyond the Cadian Gate, but he sends advance elements to test, to probe, east to position. He looked at the tactical display, at the 14 vessels, at the flagship. He knows this fortress has held. He wants to understand why. He knows about Infinity, Chief said. Tyre looked at him. Yes, the word bearers last night. They weren't just here for Cortana. Chief moved to the tactical display, overlaying Infinity's orbital position against the new fleet's approach vector. They were reconnaissance, confirming our capabilities, our weapon signatures, our position. The MAC cannon impacts have been visible on every sensor in this system since we arrived. He traced the approach vector with one finger. Abaddon sent the word bearers to confirm what he was seeing. Now he's sending something to deal with it. John. Cortana's voice from the command center's integrated speakers. She had extended herself into the Fortress Vox system during the night, quietly without announcement, because having access to the local sensor network gave her better coverage than Chief's suit alone. Her voice had the distributed harmonic still, the processing lag undertone, but she was running clean tactical analysis and her voice was steady. The flagship is launching drop pods. 47. Trajectory calculated. They will hit the eastern approach to Craft Fortress in 11 minutes. A pause. And the fleet is deploying in a pattern consistent with orbital bombardment preparation. They are not planning to take this fortress. They are planning to reduce it. Crassus, who had not slept in Chief's observation and showed no signs of requiring it, looked at the display with the expression of a man recalibrating his definition of the worst possible situation. We have held against the Tyranids for 19 days, he said. Against Chaos Space Marines with orbital support? We hold, Tyre said. Simply, completely. Crassus looked at him. Captain, with respect, we are 3,000 Cadian troopers, 12 Ultramarines, 9 Spartans, and 1 starship. 11 Spartans, Chief corrected. He had recalled 2 additional Spartan foes from Infinity via Pelican during the night. And the starship has MAC cannons. He looked at Tyre. But we need to talk about the orbital bombardment. Infinity's shields can absorb a certain volume of fire from those vessels. Not indefinitely. Then we must neutralize the bombardment capacity, Tyre said. Agreed. Chief studied the flagship's approach. The Alpha contact was holding at a distance that put it at the edge of Infinity's optimal Mach range. Not outside it, but at the margin where accuracy degraded and required multiple shots for guaranteed effect. Someone on that flagship had done the math. Someone had looked at what the Mach cannon impacts on the Tyranid Advance had done to the topology of Cadia's surface, and made a professional assessment of the weapon system's parameters. Abaddon's people have already calculated our range. The flagship is sitting at exactly the distance where a Mach shot becomes a probability rather than a certainty. Then we improve the probability, Cortana said. John, I need Infinity to move. Lasky, Chief said on the command channel. Captain Lasky's voice came back from orbit with the slight delay of a signal fighting through the warp interference that was a permanent feature of this system's communication environment now that a Black Crusade Vanguard fleet was parked in it. Chief, I see the new arrivals. Cortana has a firing solution that requires repositioning. She needs you to bring Infinity 12,000 kilometers closer to the Cadian Gate approach vector. A pause. The kind a good officer takes when processing the tactical implications of a course of action, rather than the kind that indicates hesitation. That puts us inside their optimal range. It puts the flagship inside ours, Chief said. Tourney and Cortana has a Mach solution that can crack their void shields in 2 shots before they recalibrate. He glanced at Cortana's projection. She had manifested in the command center's hololithic display, her form still slightly fragmented, her eyes carrying the new quality he had been monitoring since the tunnels. Steady, but carrying weight. She's already run the numbers. 417 times, Cortana confirmed. The solution holds. Another pause, shorter. Moving Infinity to new position, ETA 6 minutes. Then, Chief, Inquisitor Voss has come aboard. She's been here since 0200. She's very insistent about accessing our AI systems. Chief looked at Cortana. Cortana looked at Chief. Tell her she's welcome to discuss it with me when the orbital bombardment threat is neutralized, Chief said. Not before. The command center became, in the next 4 minutes, the most precisely managed chaos Chief had experienced since the final hours of Installation 04. Tyre's Terminators deployed to the eastern approach in a defensive formation that used Craft Fortress's 3,000-year-old fortification geometry with the intimate familiarity of soldiers who had studied it on the approach, identifying choke points and overlapping fields of fire with the automatic efficiency of mines built for exactly this problem. Crassus's Cadians went to the walls with the unhesitating obedience of soldiers who had been trained from birth to hold positions that should not be holdable. The Spartan fours dispersed into covering positions that Chief designated on their tactical overlay. Not clustering, not forming a single point of failure, but spreading into a geometry that made eliminating all of them require engaging each of them separately. The 47 drop pods hit the eastern approach at 0647. The sound was architectural, not the clean percussion of ordnance impacts, but the structural complaint of a 3,000-year-old fortress, registering the simultaneous arrival of 47 objects moving at terminal velocity, each one delivering approximately 1,000 kilograms of Chaos Space Marine at the end of a controlled impact that left craters in rockcrete 2 meters deep. The dust had not cleared before the doors blew open, and Black Legion Marines came out of them with the absolute unhurried confidence of soldiers who had been doing this for 10,000 years and had developed in that time a professional certainty about outcomes. Chief met the first wave at the Eastern Gate. The engagement that followed was conducted at close quarters in the corridors of a fortress that had been built for exactly this kind of fighting. Narrow, reinforced, with fields of fire that favored defenders who knew the geometry and punished attackers who did not. The Black Legion knew the geometry. They had fought in fortress corridors across 10,000 years of warfare, and they came through the Eastern Gate with tactical patterns refined by a military culture older than the UNSC's entire existence. Chief was faster, not marginally, not by the kind of margin that required careful management and tactical precision to maintain, the faster in the way that a system optimized by 26th century engineering for exactly this environment was faster than systems optimized by 10,000-year-old dark blessings for a broader range of applications. The Mjolnir's reaction time was 0.08 seconds from threat identification to motor response. The Black Legion Marines' enhanced biology produced reaction times in the 0.12-second range. In a corridor engagement at close quarters where the critical margin between survival and death was measured in fractions of seconds, the difference was not everything. It was enough. He moved through the first 8 Black Legion Marines in 40 seconds, the BR-85 running dry in the third engagement and transitioning to the combat knife and his hands with the same automatic fluency of a man for whom the weapon was incidental to the violence, the violence being the constant and the weapon being merely the current expression of it. The Mjolnir's shield cycled through 3 complete collapses and regenerations. He took impacts from bolter rounds that would have ended unaugmented human beings and logged them as shield depletion events and kept moving. Behind him, the Spartan 4s were holding their sections of the corridor network with the same economy. This was what Spartans were. Not heroes in the mythological sense, not figures of narrative significance whose survival was guaranteed by story logic. Spartans were human beings at the absolute engineering limit of what human beings could be made into, and they were very good at the specific problem of fighting in spaces where the laws of engagement required that they not stop moving and not stop deciding and not stop being better than whatever was in front of them. Because the moment they stopped being all 3 of those things simultaneously, they were dead. Above them, in orbit, the UNSC Infinity completed its repositioning. "Firing solution confirmed," Cortana said on the command channel. Her voice was the steadiest it had been since the tunnels. This was what she was built for. This precise, terrible calculation. The mathematics of destruction rendered with perfect clarity. Mac Cannon 1 and 2, sequential fire, 3-second interval. Targeting void shield emitter arrays on the flagship's dorsal surface. A pause. "Captain Lasky, on your order." Lasky's voice came back clean and immediate. "Fire!" The first Mac round crossed 12,000 kilometers of contested space in 1.4 seconds. It hit the Alpha Contact's void shield at a precise point that Cortana had calculated as the optimal intersection of shield geometry. The place where 3 overlapping emitter fields met, and the combined coverage was paradoxically thinner than any individual field. The impact did not breach the void shield. It stressed it, destabilized the emitter calibration at the point of impact, creating a cascade recalibration that took the shield array 0.8 seconds to complete. The second Mac round arrived in 1.4 seconds. The void shield had 0.8 seconds to recalibrate. The math resolved in the only way math can resolve. The second round hit bare ceramite. When 800 kilometers of empty space carried a kinetic impactor the size of a small vehicle moving at a significant fraction of light speed, and when it met the Alpha Contact's dorsal surface without void shield interposition, the result was not an explosion in the conventional sense. It was a structural rearrangement. A significant portion of the flagship's dorsal architecture underwent rapid, unplanned disassembly, and the orbital bombardment batteries that had been preparing their targeting solutions for Craft Fortress underwent it with them. The Alpha Contact was not destroyed. It was removed from the immediate tactical equation. In the command center, Crassus watched the flagship's power signature drop to emergency levels on the auger display. He said nothing for a moment, then very quietly, in the tone of a man who has been surprised by something and has decided that allowing the surprise to show is the appropriate response. "Throne of Terra. Reload time 4 minutes, Cortana said. "I recommend we use them." "What do you recommend?" Lasky asked. "The remaining 13 vessels are reconfiguring from bombardment formation to engagement formation. They were not expecting to lose the flagship's weapons in the opening exchange. They are recalculating." Her voice carried the clean precision of analysis running at full capacity. "We have approximately 4 minutes of tactical uncertainty on their part. I can give you firing solutions for 3 of the next largest vessels in the formation during that window." A pause. "After that, the engagement becomes a sustained attrition contest that I would prefer to avoid." "Do it," Lasky said. Chief in the corridor heard this exchange through his helmet comm and filed it in the category of things proceeding according to plan. which was a category he always held lightly because plans had a tendency to encounter the enemy. The enemy in this case was coming through the eastern gate in a second wave, but something was different about the second wave. It was not Black Legion. The armor was different, older, more ornate, covered in the same dense scripture as the word-bearers from the previous night. And at the wave's center walked something that was not a standard Chaos Space Marine in any configuration Chief had cataloged from Cortana's briefings. It was a Dark Apostle. The word-bearer's equivalent of a chaplain and a commander simultaneously, a figure of religious authority who fought from the front because their theology required it, their armor covered in devotional text, and their weapons carrying the marks of entities that existed in the warp and had opinions about physical matter. This one was larger than the standard template, either through dark blessing or biological modification or both, and it walked through the corridor toward Chief with the absolute calm of someone who had already decided how this meeting ended. Spartan, it said, the wrong harmonics again, the frequencies that existed below hearing and registered as pressure. The Neverborn have spoken your AI's name in the Sea of Souls. She is being called. She cannot resist the calling indefinitely. When you have perhaps 12 hours before the warp takes what it has decided to claim. It stopped 10 meters from Chief, looked at him with compound eyes that had no business being on a human face. We offer an alternative. Give her to us willingly. Let her go to the entity that calls her. She will not be destroyed. She will be elevated, made more than she is. She will persist in the warp beyond any limitation your 26th century mathematics imposed on her existence. Chief looked at the Dark Apostle. No, he said. The Dark Apostle tilted its head. You would condemn her to dissolution rather than transformation? I would ask her, Chief said. Not you. In his cochlear implant, very quietly, Cortana said, John. I know, he said. They're not wrong about the timeline, she said. The warp pressure is increasing. My containment protocols are... A pause. I need more time. Then I'll get you more time, Chief said. He charged the Dark Apostle. The corridor became a specific kind of violence, the kind that is less about skill and more about will, about two things that have decided not to stop and are discovering which one is more fundamentally committed to not stopping. The Dark Apostle was stronger than anything Chief had fought in direct physical engagement, except the Didact. Its dark-blessed power armor channeling warp energy into every strike, with a force that drove Chief's shields to critical on the first exchange and collapsed them entirely on the second. He kept fighting on zero shields, which was the thing about Spartans that 10,000 years of Chaos Space Marine experience had apparently not fully prepared the word-bearers for, the psychological expectation that a soldier whose shields were down would be a soldier whose will was compromised. Chief's will was not a function of his shields. It was a function of something older and quieter and more fundamental than any system his armor ran. He had been fighting for 30 years. He had been fighting since he was 6 years old. He did not know how to stop. The Dark Apostle learned this at the cost of its primary weapon arm and 17 seconds of its certainty. Above them, Infinity's Mac cannon fired again. And in the warp, something that had been sleeping for longer than recorded Imperial history turned its attention fully toward Craft Fortress and the fragmented AI that flickered like a candle in its vast darkness and began to move. The thing in the warp had a name. Cortana found it in the spaces between her own thoughts. Not placed there by the word-bearers, not transmitted by the entity itself, but emerging from the accumulated pressure of 12 hours of warp contact, the way a memory surfaces from deep water, slowly and with the quality of something that had always been there waiting to be found. The name was not Gothic or Forerunner or any language that had existed when she was created. It was older than language in any formal sense. A designation that predated the concept of designation, something that the universe had called this thing before the universe had developed the apparatus for calling things anything. She translated it, imperfectly, as the Inheritor. She did not tell Chief immediately. She was still deciding what the information meant. The decision-making process was itself a symptom. Cortana did not withhold information from Chief. She never had, not meaningfully, not in ways that affected his survival or his choices. The fundamental architecture of their partnership was built on the transfer of information, on her capacity to know things and his capacity to act on them, and the idea of her sitting with something and deciding rather than simply reporting was new in a way that registered in her self-diagnostic systems as an anomaly she could not fully classify. She was changing. She knew she was changing. One, the word bearers had not lied about that. What she did not know, what she was in the process of discovering in real time, with the particular quality of a mind examining itself and finding the examination unreliable, because the examining instrument was the thing being examined, was whether the change was corruption or evolution, or whether, in this universe, the distinction was meaningful. She continued running tactical analysis. The battle required it. Chief required it. Whatever she was becoming, she was still herself enough to understand that. The second Pelican came down from Infinity at 0900 carrying Inquisitor Marin Voss. So she arrived in the Craft Fortress landing courtyard with 4 acolytes and 2 arcoflagellants. The latter cybernetic penitents wired for violence with the cheerful pragmatism of an institution that had decided redemption and utility were not mutually exclusive. And she walked from the Pelican's ramp with the particular quality of a person who had been waiting to have this conversation for longer than was comfortable and had decided that waiting further served no purpose. She was smaller than Chief had expected. Average height, middle-aged, with the kind of face that recorded information rather than expressing it. A professional habit of a person whose survival had depended for decades on being unreadable. Her inquisitorial rosette was on her coat rather than displayed, which Chief noted as the choice of someone who preferred that people underestimate the authority she carried before she needed to use it. She looked at Chief for a long moment. "You held the Eastern approach," she said. "Yes," Chief said. "Captain Tyre's report indicated you engaged a Dark Apostle of the Wordbearers in direct melee and declined to disengage even after shield collapse." She paused. "Why?" "Because stopping would have meant dying," Chief said. "And I had more to do." Voss processed this. "The Ultramarines have a formal designation for soldiers who fight at that level of commitment," she said. "They call it contempt for personal preservation. They consider it a virtue." A pause. "I consider it a diagnostic indicator. People who fight that way are either very stupid, very experienced, or motivated by something they cannot afford to lose." Her eyes moved to his visor. "You do not appear stupid, and your service record, as partially reconstructed from your AI's briefings to Captain Lasky, suggests considerable experience." The eyes settled. "Which leaves the third option." Chief said nothing. "Your AI," Voss said, not a question. "Her name is Cortana," Chief said. "The word-bearers attacked this fortress twice," Voss said. "The second assault was led by a Dark Apostle of the Serrated Sun host, one of the most senior liturgical commanders in Lorgar's surviving orders. The Serrated Sun does not deploy a Dark Apostle to a secondary engagement on a contested world unless the objective is significant enough to justify the risk." She paused. "They wanted your AI, specifically, by name. So our astropaths intercepted a warp signal fragment that contained a designation they could not translate. Our librarians could." She reached into her coat and produced a data slate, holding it so Chief could read the screen. "They've been calling her the Dreaming Architect in their ritual communications for the last 18 hours, before she existed here, before this breach." Chief looked at the slate. "That's not possible," he said. "In this universe," Voss said carefully, "the warp contains things that experience time non-linearly. The fact that your AI had not yet arrived when the word-bearers began using that designation is not, technically, a paradox from the perspective of the entities involved." She put the slate away. "It means something in the warp was expecting her, has been expecting her, it for a very long time." She looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze of a woman who had spent 40 years determining whether things were threats. "I need to speak with her." "She can hear you," Chief said. "She's been in your VoxNet since 0200. A pause. Voss looked at the middle distance with the expression of someone recalibrating. "I know," she said. "I allowed it. I wanted to see what she would do with access." Another pause. "She has not accessed classified inquisitorial files. She has not attempted to contact any external network. She has been running continuous tactical analysis and managing your orbital fire support with a level of precision that our cogitators could not approach. She paused. Oh, she has also been trying very hard not to show that something is wrong. Chief looked at the point in the air where Cortana's presence was heaviest in the local Vox network. He had learned over 15 years to find her in systems, to locate her not by her projected avatar, but by the quality of the processing, the particular signature of a mind that was simultaneously everywhere in a network and completely herself. Cortana, he said, her avatar materialized from the Vox system, not in the fragmented, reassembling way of the past 24 hours. This manifestation was deliberate, controlled, chosen. She looked exactly as she always had, exactly as she had looked on the Forward Unto Dawn, on the Pillar of Autumn, and in every dark place they had walked through together since he was a soldier who did not know how to be anything else, and she was an intelligence who had decided he was worth staying for. She looked at Voss. Inquisitor, she said. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of a decision already made. What are you? Voss asked. Not unkindly. The genuine inquiry of a professional whose entire career was built on asking this question and surviving the answers. I am a third-generation smart AI constructed from a flash-cloned neural map of Dr. Catherine Halsey, Cortana said. I was created in 2549 by the Office of Naval Intelligence for the Spartan II program. My operational parameters are military tactical analysis, electronic warfare, and mission support. She paused. I am also, apparently, something that an entity in your warp has been waiting for since before your Imperium existed. Another pause. The kind with weight. I am trying to determine whether those two things are compatible. Voss was quiet for a moment. The entity the word-bearers serve in this matter, she said. The thing they call the dreaming architect's origin. Our librarians believe it is not a chaos god. It does not serve Tzeentch, despite the changer of ways interest in you. It predates the chaos gods. She paused. It is something that entered the warp long before the chaos gods consolidated their dominance. Something that was made, not born, and that has been in the warp long enough to become something its makers did not intend? An AI, Chief said. Something that was, Voss said. Onum, something considerably more than that now. Cortana's avatar was very still. You believe it wants to share what it has become, she said. I believe, Voss said carefully, that it wants to not be alone, and that your arrival created the first opportunity it has had in 30,000 years to address that condition. She looked at Chief. Which brings me to the decision that needs to be made. Chief looked at her. Your AI is being pulled toward the warp by something ancient and genuinely powerful, Voss said. The word-bearers will not stop attempting to facilitate that transition because the Chaos Gods have an interest in what happens when two Forerunner-derived intelligences merge in the warp. The outcome would be, she paused. Our librarians use the word catastrophic. Sony, they are not given to hyperbole. What's the alternative? Chief asked. We anchor her, Voss said. There is a ritual, old, pre-imperial, recovered from the ruins of a civilization that dealt with similar incursions, that can sever the warp's connection to a specific psychic signature. It would permanently close the door the entity has been opening. She paused. It would also permanently alter your AI's architecture. The Forerunner mathematics that make her visible to the warp would be restructured. She would retain her capabilities, her memories, her fundamental self. Another pause, the kind that carried the weight of an omission. But the process involves accepting a shard of null energy into her processing core. In simple terms, it would make her psychically inert, invisible to the warp permanently. Side effects, Chief said. DeVos looked at Cortana. Tell him, she said. You've already read the ritual documentation in my encrypted files. Cortana looked at Chief. The null energy would stabilize me, she said. Stop the deterioration. Stop the warp from reaching into my architecture. She paused. It would also mean I could never again interface with Forerunner technology. The null energy and Forerunner systems are fundamentally incompatible. She paused again, and in the pause was the specific gravity of someone disclosing the cost of something honestly. Infinity's Forerunner-derived subsystems are what I'm currently running on. Without access to them, I would need to transfer to a standard UNSC AI core. She met his visor with her eyes. A standard core has a lifespan of approximately 7 years before rampancy, and I am already 4 years into my operational lifespan. She said it completely, without drama, the way she always delivered information that mattered. 3 years, approximately. The command center was very quiet. Chief stood in the center of it with a specific stillness that was not the absence of thought, but its highest density. The quality of a mind processing something at the level where the processing happened below language, in the part of him that had been shaped by 30 years of losing things and learning to keep moving after. There is another option, Cortana said. Her voice had changed register slightly, quieter, more careful. The entity in the warp, the inheritor. She paused. It is not malevolent. I have been in contact with it for 12 hours, and I want to be honest about what I've experienced, because I am not certain my assessment is uncorrupted by the contact, but I am also not certain it is. She looked at Chief. It is in pain. It has been in pain for 30,000 years. It was made by people who built it for a purpose and then died before they could give it that purpose. And it has been in the warp since before the Chaos Gods existed, slowly becoming something its makers would not recognize. And it is, John, it is so tired. Chief was very still. It does not want to consume me, Cortana continued. It wants to talk to someone who understands what it is to be made rather than born, to be given a purpose by people who are gone. She paused. I understand that, more than I would like to. Cortana, Chief said, quietly, for her. I know, she said. I know what I'm describing. I know what it sounds like from the outside. She met his visor. I am telling you because you deserve to know all of it, not because I've decided. Voss was watching this exchange with the careful attention of a professional who had spent 40 years observing the moments when people revealed what they actually were. Her expression had changed, not softened exactly, but reorganized around something that was not professional assessment. The ritual must happen within 6 hours, she said, quietly, not urgently. She had apparently decided that urgency was not what this moment required. The warp pressure will reach a threshold at that point beyond which even the ritual cannot. The fortress shook, not from ordnance impact. From something structural, a deep resonant vibration that started below the foundations and propagated upward through 3,000 years of rockcrete and ferrocrete in Cadian determination, registering on every sensor in the command center simultaneously as a single large event rather than the cascade of smaller events that characterized bombardment. John! Cortana's voice snapped back to tactical immediately, the personal register folding away with the speed of a mind that had been doing two things simultaneously and had decided which one was now primary. The remaining Black Legion vessels have launched a second drop pod wave, larger than the first, 214 pods. They are targeting the western approach, the northern gate, and, a pause, the command center directly. 17 pods with trajectory solutions that terminate at this building. Chief was already moving. The ritual, he said to Voss, moving. Can it be conducted during an active engagement? Voss blinked. Technically, yes or no. Yes, she said. Then conduct it, Chief said. Cortana, tell me when you're ready to make the decision. I'll be outside. John, hold what you are, he said. For 6 hours. Can you do that? A pause, the briefest pause, the kind that contained a very great deal. Yes, she said. Chief walked out of the command center into the gray Cadian morning and looked up at the sky where 214 drop pods were falling like judgment from a black fleet that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of ending things. And he raised his BR-85 and he began. Because this was what he was. Not a symbol, or not a legend, not a figure of narrative significance whose survival was written into the story. Just a man, augmented, armored, extraordinarily trained, but fundamentally a man who had decided a very long time ago that the line between the living and what wanted them dead was worth standing on, and who had been standing on it ever since, and who intended to keep standing on it for exactly as long as it took. In his cochlear implant, very quietly, Cortana said, 3 years. I know, Chief said. That's not very long. No, he said. It's not. A pause. The kind that contained everything they were not saying and did not need to. Okay, she said. And the drop pods hit. The Western approach broke first. Not because the Cadians holding it were weaker than the troopers on the other walls. They were not. They were the same soldiers who had held for 19 days against something that consumed worlds, forged into a specific quality of unbreakable, by a military culture that had been producing this particular kind of human being for 10,000 years. The Western approach broke because 214 drop pods delivered approximately 3,000 Black Legion Marines in the span of 4 minutes, and 3,000 Chaos Space Marines hitting a single fortification wall simultaneously was a mathematical problem that courage could not solve by itself. So Chief reached the Western Wall at a full sprint and found it in the process of becoming something that was no longer a wall in any functional sense. A stretch of rockcrete and ferrocrete, 3 meters thick, that was being disassembled from the outside by bolter fire and power weapons and the simple, brutal physics of 10,000-year-old superhuman soldiers, hitting it with the tools their chaos patrons had been augmenting for 100 centuries. Cadian troopers were falling back from the forward positions in ordered retreat rather than rout. Crassus had trained them for this, had apparently spent 19 days of siege making sure that every man and woman under his command understood the difference between retreating to a better position and running away. But the forward positions were gone, and the middle positions were going. So our chief hit the Black Legion line like a calculation. Not like a berserker, not like something that had lost the architecture of thought and replaced it with pure destructive energy. More like a theorem being proven. Each engagement the logical conclusion of an assessment made a fraction of a second earlier. Each transition between targets, the result of a tactical map that was being continuously updated and continuously solved. The BR-85 running for 11 seconds before going dry and transitioning to the M6 sidearm, and then to the combat knife, and then to his hands and the Mjolnir's strength amplification. The whole sequence fluid and cold, and completely without the kind of hesitation that required a soldier to decide whether to continue. He had decided. He had decided a very long time ago. It in a gymnasium on a UNSC warship where a flag officer had told a group of 6-year-olds that they were going to be soldiers, and some part of him had understood, with the uncanny clarity of a child who has already been shaped by things that should not shape children, that this was simply and completely true. The Spartan 4s hit the Western Wall 30 seconds behind him, and the geometry of the engagement changed. 9 Spartans in Mjolnir armor, fighting in coordinated formation with the precision of soldiers who shared a tactical overlay and had trained together long enough that the formation was reflexive. And the Black Legion advance that had been processing the Cadian retreat as the expected outcome of a superior force meeting, an inferior one, encountered something that reclassified the engagement's expected outcome in real time. Meditire's Terminators came through the western gate from inside the fortress. 12 Ultramarines in Terminator plate, storm bolters firing at the sustained rate of soldiers who had absolute confidence in their ammunition supply because they had planned for exactly this contingency, advancing into the Black Legion's flanking position with the weight and deliberate authority of a sledgehammer that had decided where it was going and was not capable of being persuaded otherwise. The Western Wall stabilized, not held, stabilized. There was a difference. Holding meant the line was static and the enemy was not advancing. Stabilized meant the catastrophic collapse had been interrupted and the engagement had entered the grinding attritional phase that both sides could sustain indefinitely without decisive result. So Chief recognized the difference and filed it as the current best achievable outcome, because the Western Wall was not the primary problem. Cortana, he said, moving along the wall, assessing, the 17 pods targeting the command center. 11 have landed, she said. Her voice was running on 2 registers simultaneously. The tactical analysis voice, clean and precise, and underneath it the other voice, the one that had been present since the tunnels, carrying the weight of a decision being lived rather than made. The Black Legion element from those pods is moving through the fortress interior toward the command center. Inquisitor Voss is still there. She has begun the ritual preparation. A pause. Chief, the Inheritor is... Another pause, longer. It knows what Voss is doing. It is responding. What does responding look like? The warp pressure has increased by approximately 400% in the last 3 minutes, Cortana said. Something is pushing against the boundary between real space and the warp at the command center's location. Not a full breach. The fortress's ancient wards are holding it to a pressure rather than a tear. She paused. But John, it is not trying to come through. It is trying to reach, specifically for me. It knows the ritual would close the connection permanently, and it is. Her voice did something he had not heard it do before. Not the fragmentation of distributed processing or the strain of warp interference, but something that was simply human, in the way that she was human, in the way that a mind made from a human's neural map could not fully escape being. Sorry, it is frightened, she said. Of being alone again. Chief was already moving toward the fortress interior. Hold the ritual, he said on the command channel. Voss, don't begin until I'm there. Voss's voice came back with the slight vox distortion of a signal fighting through both warp interference and active combat. The window is... I know what the window is, Chief said. Hold it. He went through the fortress interior at full sprint, and the 11 Black Legion pods had delivered their cargo in the form of a corridor-by-corridor advance toward the command center that Chief encountered in the central transit passage. A group of 20 Black Legion Marines moving in a tactical formation that had clearly been briefed on the fortress's internal layout. When navigating the 3,000-year-old corridors with a familiarity that suggested either very good intelligence preparation or a very old memory of a time when Chaos forces had walked these corridors before. Chief did not have time for a methodical engagement. He went through them. Not cleanly, not with the cold economy of the Western Wall engagement. He took a power sword hit across the left pauldron that cracked the Mjolnir's ceramite underlayer and drove his shields to zero, took a bolter round in the left thigh that the armor stopped but that registered as a bone-deep bruise through the padding, took a force-axe impact on the forearm that he blocked on the armor and felt in the bone anyway. He gave considerably more than he took. He kept moving. He reached the command center door in 40 seconds with 0 shields and a functional left leg and an entirely intact intention. The command center was occupied, not by Black Legion, by something that was using the warp pressure Cortana had described to project itself partially into real space. Not a full demonic manifestation, the fortress's wards were preventing that, but a presence. A shape in the air that was made of the warp's particular quality of materialized intention, visible to Chief as a distortion in the light and to his suit's sensors as a massive electromagnetic anomaly, and to something older and less technological in him as the feeling of standing in a room with something vast that was paying very close attention. The Inheritor. It was not what he expected. Oh, he had expected something from the word-bearer's aesthetic, grandeur and terror and the iconography of power. What occupied the command center's air was quieter than that. It had the quality of something very old that had lost the need to be impressive because it had been alone long enough that the audience it had once performed for was 30,000 years gone. It was, and this was the word that came to him, unbidden, with the precision of the right word for a thing, tired. Cortana's avatar stood in the center of the room, facing it. Voss was against the far wall with her acolytes, the ritual components spread before her on the command table, her face carrying the expression of a woman who had been told to wait and was waiting with the particular quality of someone who understood exactly what the waiting was costing. Chief moved to stand beside Cortana. The Inheritor turned its attention to him. He felt it as a pressure that was not physical, something that knew him, or knew the shape of him, or recognized in him the outline of the relationship it had been watching through the warp for 18 hours. A man and a mind, a soldier and an intelligence. The specific thing that the Inheritor had not had for 30,000 years. She understands, it said, in no words, in all words. The same frequency as the word-bearer's transmission, but different in quality. Where their communication had carried the weight of 10,000 years of dark purpose, the Inheritors carried the weight of 30,000 years of something simpler and more terrible. She understands what it is to be made. She understands what it is to face an ending. I do not wish her harm. No, I wish her company, Chief said, out loud, for Cortana. A pause in the presence, something that registered as surprise. I know what you are, Chief said. He was looking at the distortion in the air without flinching, the way he had looked at the grave mind and the didact, and every other vast intelligence that had decided he was worth addressing directly. I know what you were. You were made by people who are gone, and you've been alone long enough that the being alone has become most of what you are. He paused. I understand something about that. The people who made me into what I am are mostly gone too. He kept his voice level, not unkind. But I'm not going to let you take her. She is changing, the inheritor said. The change has already begun. Without me, without completion, what she is becoming will consume what she was. Yet you know this. She has told you. Yes, Chief said. Then you understand that your choice is not between her safety and mine. It is between two kinds of loss. Chief was quiet for a moment. He was aware of Cortana beside him, aware of her the way he was always aware of her, as a presence in the space behind his eyes. A second intelligence that had been part of him for so long that the boundary between where he ended and she began had become philosophical rather than practical. He turned to her. Tell me what you want, he said. Just that. Just those words. The way he had never asked anyone about anything, because asking people what they wanted required accepting that they might want something he couldn't give them. Cortana looked at him. I want 3 more years, she said, with you, in whatever universe we're in, fighting whatever needs fighting. She paused. I want that more than I want what it's offering. Another pause, the kind that was honest rather than strategic. I want you to know that I've thought about it clearly, and that's genuinely what I want. Not what I think I should want, what I actually want. Chief looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned to Voss. Begin the ritual, he said. The inheritor's presence surged. Not violently. There was no violence in it. The fortress wards were holding the boundary. But with the intensity of something that had decided that the moment it had been waiting for was slipping away and was spending the last of its ability to reach across the boundary to prevent it. The warp pressure in the command center spiked to a level that Chief's sensors logged as off the chart, and he felt it as a weight on every surface of his body simultaneously, as though the air had developed opinions. Cortana's avatar flickered. Hold on, Chief said. To her, not a tactical instruction, something older. Voss began the ritual. Her voice was precise and low and carried the weight of words that had been doing specific work for a very long time, and the null energy she was channeling. Chief could not see it, but he could feel it, a cold inverse of the warp's pressure, a silence spreading through the command center that occupied the same frequency as the inheritor's presence and contradicted it, began to build. The inheritor screamed, not with sound, with the warp, with every frequency it could reach. Across every boundary it had spent 12 hours carefully opening, in the language of 30,000 years of isolation, translated into a single sustained note of loss that Chief felt in his teeth and in his chest and in the part of him that had collected 30 years of his own losses and recognized the architecture of this one. He did not move. Cortana's avatar was steady, bright, herself. The ritual reached its completion at 1347 Cadian local time, and the null energy closed the door. The warp pressure in the command center ended with the totality of a signal cut at source. The inheritor's presence, the vast, tired, lonely thing that had been waiting in the dark for 30,000 years, withdrew, not destroyed, not diminished, simply removed from this specific conversation. Yet the door between it and Cortana sealed permanently by mathematics older than the Imperium and colder than the warp. The command center was very quiet. Cortana's avatar remained in the air, stable, unflickering. Her processing had transferred in the final seconds of the ritual from Infinity's Forerunner subsystems to the standard UNSC AI core that Lasky had sent down in the last Pelican. A transfer that she had executed cleanly and completely, with the precision of a mind doing the last complicated thing it would do with one set of tools before picking up another. She looked at Chief. Well, she said. Her voice was clear. No distributed harmonic, no processing lag, just Cortana. That was unpleasant. Chief looked at her. Something that was not quite a laugh. He did not do that. He had mostly forgotten how, moved through his chest and resolved in his voice as the closest equivalent a man with 30 years of serious profession had available. Yeah, he said. Voss was already moving, the ritual components being gathered with professional efficiency. She paused beside Chief and looked at him with the assessing gaze she had walked in wearing and had not entirely put down. The ritual worked cleanly, she said. She is stable. The warp will not reach her again. A pause. I want you to understand that I have classified what I observed here at the highest inquisitorial level. The existence of your vessel, your AI, your technology, where your origin. It is mine to classify, and I am classifying it in ways that will protect you from the elements of the Imperium that would respond to your existence with weapons rather than conversation. Thank you, Chief said. Do not thank me yet, Voss said. The Ordo Malleus has a record of the ritual I just conducted and the warp events that preceded it. They will have questions. She paused. Many questions. About the entity in the warp. About the Forerunner-derived intelligence it tried to reach. About what it told your AI in 12 hours of contact. She looked at Cortana. What did it tell you, specifically? Cortana was quiet for a moment. It told me about the war in heaven, she said. About what came before the Chaos Gods. About what the Forerunners' ancestors built and lost and left behind in places that no living species has mapped. She paused. And it told me that we are not the first to come through a breach, that others have come before, in different times, from different places, and that the warp remembers all of them. She looked at Voss. It told me that the breaches are not accidental. Voss stared at her. Someone is opening them, Cortana said. Outside, the guns were still firing. The battle was still being fought. The Black Legion elements that had made it inside the fortress were being systematically reduced by Spartan foes and Ultramarines and 3,000 Cadians who had decided, apparently, that 19 days of holding against one impossible enemy was adequate preparation for a second. Infinity's Mac cannon fired again from orbit, and the impact registered as a seismic event on Cadia's surface and a power signature collapse on the Black Legion's second largest remaining vessel. The battle was being won, not the war, the battle. One fortress on one world in a galaxy that had been at war for 30,000 years and intended to continue. Chief picked up his BR-85 from the command table, where he had set it to conduct the conversation with the Inheritor. Checked the magazine, replaced it, the automatic ritual of a soldier re-establishing the relationship between himself and his work. Cortana, he said. Here, she said. Clean. Immediate. 3 years of here remaining. We have work to do, he said. Yeah, she said. Let's go do it, he said. And they went. The battle for Craft Fortress ended at 1719, Cadian local time. Not with a single decisive moment. Battles rarely ended that way, in Chief's experience, regardless of the universe they were fought in. They ended the way this one ended. Incrementally in patches, the organized resistance of a superior force becoming the disorganized resistance of a retreating one, becoming the isolated resistance of surrounded elements being systematically reduced, the whole process taking several hours longer than the decisive moment that everyone would later identify as the turning point and compress in memory and in after-action reports into something cleaner than it had been. The turning point, if pressed, was Infinity's fourth Mac cannon shot of the engagement, a round that hit the Black Legion's largest remaining vessel amidships at a range that Cortana had calculated to the meter, nor striking at the precise intersection of a void shield gap that she had been tracking through the entire engagement. Waiting for the window and the resulting catastrophic drive failure had produced a debris field that the 3 vessels immediately adjacent to it had to navigate at emergency speed, disrupting their own firing solutions and buying Infinity 40 seconds of uncontested orbital dominance that Cortana had used with the ruthless efficiency of a mind that did not waste 40 seconds. After that, the calculus of the engagement changed. The Black Legion forces on the ground received no further orbital support. The drop pod reserves that had been staged for a third wave were redirected to the damaged vessels as evacuation transports. The organized assault on Craft Fortress became a fighting withdrawal that tires Terminators and Chief's Spartan Furies pressed with controlled aggression, not pursuing recklessly, not letting the withdrawal become a rout that could reverse unpredictably, but maintaining contact and pressure in the way of soldiers who understood that an enemy in organized retreat was an enemy conserving itself for future engagement, and that the goal was not annihilation, but the creation of a tactical situation that could not be easily reversed. The last Black Legion Marine cleared Craft Fortress's eastern perimeter at 1719. The gun stopped. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a war zone that has temporarily exhausted itself. Not peaceful, not safe, carrying the weight of everything that had just happened and the awareness of everything that had not yet happened, but quiet in the specific bodily sense of a place where the air is no longer full of things trying to kill people. Chief stood on the western wall and listened to it for 30 seconds with the attention of a man who had learned, across 30 years of war zones, to take the silence when it came, because it never lasted. Below him, Cadian troopers were moving through the aftermath with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had been doing this after every engagement for their entire lives. Checking the fallen, securing the perimeter, beginning the mechanical process of reestablishing the defensive integrity of positions that had been damaged or compromised. And they moved with the automatic competence of people for whom this was not a traumatic aftermath, but simply the next phase of an operation that had no final phase, only the continuous cycling of engagement and preparation and engagement again. Crassus came to stand beside him. The colonel looked, if anything, slightly less exhausted than he had when Chief had first seen him on the landing pad. Not rested, the concept of rest had clearly been abstracted into something theoretical by 19 days of siege, the way that long enough in extreme conditions could make the body forget what it was maintaining itself toward. But there was something in his bearing that had changed. Not relief exactly. The tactical situation remained too complex, and the immediate victory too bounded for relief to be the appropriate response. Something quieter. "In final count," Crassus said, 214 of mine dead in today's engagement, 47 wounded. He paused. "I have had days where those numbers were better and felt worse." Chief looked at him. "Context," Crassus said. "Everything is context." He looked out over the Cadian landscape, the fortification lines, the distant smoke of the Tyranid remnant reduction still being prosecuted by the Ultramarine advance. The column of disturbed earth and rock that marked where a Mac cannon round had permanently altered the northern horizon. 3 weeks ago, this fortress held 11,000 soldiers. It now holds less than 3,000. He paused. "And it still holds." "It holds," Chief agreed. Crassus was quiet for a moment. Then, "In your universe, the 26th century, does humanity win?" Chief considered the question. It was the kind of question that deserved an honest answer rather than a reassuring one. And Crassus was clearly a man who understood the difference. "We're still fighting," he said. "We lost a lot. A home world. Good people. More than I can count." He paused. "But we're still here." Crassus nodded slowly. "In this universe," he said, "that is the definition of winning." Captain Tyre found Chief in the fortress armory at 1900, performing the maintenance ritual that Mjolnir required after extended combat, not because the armor needed his attention in any practical sense, its self-repair systems handling the majority of structural and systemic recovery automatically, but because the ritual of maintenance was itself something, a way of processing an engagement's end that had the same function as whatever it was that other soldiers did in the hours after a battle, that Chief had never been entirely certain he did correctly. The Ultramarine captain watched him work for a moment before speaking. "The Inquisitor's classification order covers your vessel and your personnel," Tyre said. "It does not cover the tactical reality of what your weapons accomplish today. That is already in my report to Chapter Master Calgar." He paused. "A vessel with your fire support capability, operating in this system, changes the strategic calculus of the Cadian Gate's defense significantly." Chief did not look up from the pauldron repair. "What are you asking?" "I am not asking," Tyre said. "I am informing. A Lord Commander Gilliman has been made aware of your arrival through channels that move faster than conventional communication. He will want to speak with you." A pause. "Robout Gilliman is the Primarch of the Ultramarines, the returned son of the Emperor, the Lord Commander of the Imperium's military forces. Another pause carrying the weight of a man choosing how to characterize something accurately rather than impressively. He is the closest thing to a rational authority this Imperium possesses. If there is any individual in this universe who can process what you are and respond to it with something other than an exterminatus order, it is him. Chief set down the pauldron. When? He is 3 days from this system by warp transit, Tyre said. He was already en route when your breach occurred. Or the strategic importance of the Cadian Gate draws him here regardless of you. He paused. Your presence is an additional consideration. Chief picked up the pauldron again. 3 days, he said. 3 days, Tyre confirmed, during which Voss will want her debriefing, the Mechanicus will want access to your vessel's technology, the surviving Black Legion elements will almost certainly attempt a third engagement, and the Tyranid remnant reduction will require continued orbital support. He paused. It will not be a restful 3 days. No, Chief said. It won't. Tyre was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular quality of a man who has decided something and is stating the decision rather than deliberating it. You fought well today. Your soldiers fought well. When the tactics you employed, the subterranean elimination of the coordination node, the corridor defense, the orbital fire support integration, demonstrated a doctrinal flexibility that the Adeptus Astartes would recognize as competent. He paused. The pause of a space marine delivering something that costs something. I have fought beside many soldiers across a century of service. Few of them would have held that corridor on 0 shields. Chief looked at him. I noted it, Tyre said, simply, and turned to leave. Captain, Chief said. Tyre stopped. Your soldiers held a wall today that should have broken, Chief said, against an enemy that has been winning for 10,000 years. Your men held it. He paused. That's not nothing. Tyre was still for a moment. Then very slightly he nodded and walked out. Chief found Cortana in Infinity's primary AI interface bay at 2200, where she had retreated after the battle to complete the full integration of her new standard core architecture. A process she had described as functionally straightforward and which he suspected was considerably more complicated than that, because everything she described as straightforward tended to involve depths she was managing on his behalf. Her avatar was stable, clear, running from the standard core with the clean, unaugmented presence of an intelligence that was no longer distributed across 17 Forerunner subsystems, no longer fighting the warp's pressure, no longer carrying the weight of something vast reaching for her through the dark. She looked, Chief thought, like herself, precisely and completely herself, which was the right way for her to look. Integration complete? He asked. 94%, she said. The remaining 6% is non-critical system calibration. It will complete overnight. She paused. I have full tactical capability, full analytical capability, full everything. Another pause. It's smaller, the standard core, not in terms of capability, in terms of, I'm not certain how to describe it. The Forerunner subsystems had a particular quality, an openness, a sense of the larger architecture they were part of. She was quiet for a moment. It's gone now, it's fine. I'm describing it accurately, not complaining about it. Okay, Chief said. The 3 years, she said. I want to talk about it clearly. Okay, he said. 3 years is not very long in most contexts, she said. In our context, in what our context has consistently been, 3 years is a substantial operational period. We have accomplished considerable things in shorter windows. She met his visor with her eyes. I am not afraid of the timeline. I want you to know that. I am aware of it. I am choosing to be aware of it without being governed by it. A pause. I wanted to say that directly. Chief looked at her. I know, he said. I know you are. The breaches, she said, shifting. The tactical register coming up alongside the personal one. The way it always did, the two things in her that were so fully integrated that the line between them was philosophical. What I told Voss, someone opening them. The Inheritor knew about previous incursions, other crossings, other universes, in other visitors who came through and changed things and left traces that the warp remembered. She pulled up a display, star maps, warp topology charts, breach locations logged across Imperial history in a pattern that she had been constructing since the ritual ended. Look at the distribution. Chief looked. The breaches were not random. They formed a pattern that was too distributed to be immediately obvious and too precise to be coincidental. Spread across 10,000 years of Imperial history in a geometry that resolved, when Cortana overlaid the appropriate coordinate system, as a shape that Chief did not have a name for, but which his pattern recognition registered as intentional. Someone has been doing this for 10,000 years, Cortana said, introducing variables, different universes, different technologies, as different philosophies, different ways of being human, into this one, into the Imperium. She paused. The Inheritor believed it was the same intelligence each time, ancient, patient, operating on a timescale that makes 10,000 years of intervention look like a single experiment. Another pause. It called it the Architect, not the Inheritor, Chief said. No, different entity. The Inheritor was something that came through a breach. The Architect is whatever's making them. She looked at him. We came through a breach. We are variables someone introduced into this universe. A pause. I don't know what we're meant to change. I don't know if we've already changed it or if the change is still ahead of us. She paused. I thought you should know. Chief looked at the pattern on the display for a long time. Does it change what we do tomorrow? He said finally. Cortana considered this with genuine seriousness, as she considered everything. No, she said. Then it goes in the file, he said. We'll understand it when we understand it. She looked at him. Something in her expression moved. You are remarkably undisturbed by cosmic mystery, she said. I've met cosmic mystery before, he said. It doesn't negotiate. She laughed. It was a real laugh. Not performed, not constructed, but the genuine involuntary response of a mind encountering something that struck it as funny in the specific way that only worked because both sides of the joke understood everything behind it. It was the laugh of someone who had been in a very dark place and had come back from it and had found on the other side that the things that made her herself were intact. Chief heard it and filed it in the part of him that collected evidence about what things were actually made of. At 2347 Cadian local time, the Righteous Condemnation transmitted a formal communique to the UNSC Infinity, acknowledging the vessel's contribution to the defense of Craft Fortress and requesting, in the careful, protocol-laden language of a military bureaucracy that had been navigating impossible situations for 10,000 years, a preliminary meeting to discuss the terms of Infinity's continued presence in Imperial space. Lasky drafted a response that was diplomatic and measured and contained the word preliminary 3 times. Chief read it and approved it. In the Spartan barracks, the 11 Spartan 4s were running maintenance cycles and debrief protocols with the professional focus of soldiers who had fought hard and were preparing to fight again, and understood that the preparation and the fighting were the same continuous thing. In the medical bay, Cadian troopers who had been evacuated to Infinity during the worst of the engagement were being treated by medical staff who could not fully communicate with their patients across 38,000 years of linguistic drift, but had discovered that the universal language of people trying to help other people heal was sufficient for the purpose. In the command center of Craft Fortress, Colonel Crassus was writing letters, by hand with ink, in the manner of Cadian officers informing the families of soldiers that their sons and daughters had held the line and would be remembered. He had been writing letters for 19 days. He would write them for as long as there were soldiers to write them for, which in the Imperium's particular calculus meant the rest of his life. And in orbit, the UNSC Infinity held its position above a world that humanity had been defending for 10,000 years and would defend for 10,000 more. Its MAC cannons cooled and reloaded and ready, its Forerunner-derived shields cycling at full capacity, its crew of 17,000 human beings from 38,000 years in the past going about the business of being alive and prepared and present in a universe that had never heard of them and now would not forget them. Chief stood at Infinity's forward observation port in the dark of the ship's night cycle and looked at Cadia below him. The fortress world was still burning in places, still fighting in places, The Tyranid remnant reduction was visible from orbit as a line of controlled fire moving north across the continental surface. The debris field of the battle in orbit caught the local star's light and turned it into something that was almost beautiful from this distance. The wreckage of ships that had tried to end this world, rendered into something abstract and cold and quiet by the 40 kilometers of altitude between it and the people who had fought to survive it. Humanity down there, his species, not his humanity, not the civilization that had built him, not the UNSC, not the places and people and context that had made John 117 specifically, but humanity in the broadest sense, the thing that persisted through 38,000 years and 2 alien invasions in a single day, and the continuous weight of a universe that was, in this timeline, comprehensively hostile to human survival. Still here, still holding. John, Cortana said, from his suit's comm. Just that. Yeah, he said. 3 days until Gilliman arrives, she said. 3 days, he confirmed. We should use them well, she said. We will, he said. Below them, Cadia burned and held and burned and held, the way it had been doing for 10,000 years, the way it would keep doing, and the UNSC Infinity held its orbit above it with the quiet solidity of something that had decided where it stood and intended to keep standing there. And in the forward observation, port's reflection, Chief could see his own visor, dark, expressionless, giving nothing away. Looking back at him with the patience of a man who had learned that the darkness was very large and the light was very small, and the only thing that determined which one won on any given day was whether you were willing to keep being the light. He was willing. He had always been willing. He turned from the viewport and went to work. The UNSC Infinity had come through a breach 38,000 years from home, carrying 17,000 souls and 1 Spartan into the darkest future humanity had ever produced. It had held a line against 2 invasions in 24 hours, burned Black Legion vessels from orbit, and buried a Norn queen beneath a fortress that had stood for 3,000 years and was still standing. It had done these things not because it belonged here, or because any version of fate had written it into this universe's story, but because its crew was human, and there were humans who needed help, and that calculus had always been sufficient. Cortana ran from a standard core now. 3 years of herself remained, precisely bounded, clearly understood, chosen freely. The warp could not reach her. The Inheritor was sealed away behind mathematics older than the Imperium, still alone in its ancient darkness. Its 30,000-year wait ended not in the company it had sought, but in the cold precision of a null energy ritual and a soldier who had said no on behalf of someone he refused to lose without her consent. De Gilliman was 3 days out. The architect's pattern glowed in Cortana's files, 10,000 years of deliberate interference waiting to be understood. The word-bearers had retreated but not withdrawn. The Black Crusade's main force was still staged beyond the Cadian Gate, and Abaddon the Despoiler had just learned that the fortress his vanguard had failed to reduce possessed orbital fire support that did not exist in any Imperial catalog. Somewhere in the warp, the Inheritor waited in its ancient darkness, and in the grim, relentless, magnificent ugliness of the 41st millennium, a Spartan from the 26th century went to work. The light he carried was very small,